Chapter 175. Although the phone was an antique, the numeric keypad hadn't changed. Based on the movement of Father Gao's fingers when he made the call, it should be the number she mentioned. Upon hearing that there was also the contact information of Father Gao's assistant, the anxious director Li didn't think too much about it. Go to the front desk. Come. Follow me to the front desk. Thank goodness you know. Otherwise, I'd be worried. At the front desk, the person on duty was still Belle. When he saw Yi Qian, he winked and smiled as he dialed the number for Director Li. The person who answered the phone was indeed Father Gao's assistant. It only took a few minutes for him to get in touch with Father Gao. Your classmate. Do you want to say something? The car stopped at the side of the road. Father Gao looked at his only son coldly. When he saw that his son didn't even look at him, his angry face couldn't help but soften. They're very worried about you. Say something to her. Gao Yang clenched his teeth and turned his head. He reached out to take the phone and said, "Hello." Then he heard Yi Qian's clear voice, "Where is she? Do you know that it's already half an hour past the time we agreed to return to the hotel?" On the other side, Director Li quickly wrote a line of words. Yi Qian read it out loud. "Sorry, she's already back." He didn't expect it to be Yi Qian. His cold voice immediately softened. Return to the hotel in 10 minutes. I'm hanging up. He hung up after he finished speaking. Yi Qian was even faster. He had already put the phone back on the phone. I said I'll be back in 10 minutes. Don't worry, go eat. The phone rang again. This time, it was picked up by the front desk. Excuse me. Belle smiled at Yi Qian with the phone in his hand. Before she left, he said politely, "It's your friend. She probably has something urgent to talk to you about." It was a call from Yang Yi. It was an extremely urgent call. Yi Qian had to make a trip to the supermarket immediately. Director Li didn't know where the supermarket was. After Belle brought Yi Qian to the supermarket, Yi Qian politely declined Belle's company as she needed to buy female products. She indicated that she already knew where to go and went to the supermarket alone to buy underwear and sanitary pads for Yang Yi. It was already past 7:00 in the evening, and the streets of Sydney were the same as in China. The lights had just been lit up, decorating the entire city, and the endless traffic added color to the city like a symphony. The towering trees on both sides of the street made the bright street lights only shine dimly on the sidewalk, faintly outlining the sparse silhouettes of pedestrians. Yi Qian held on to the bag that didn't take up much of his weight. When he was about a kilometer away from the hotel, he saw Gao Yang's figure in front of him. His footsteps were somewhat sluggish, and he walked with a heavy heart. Yi Qian paused and pursed his lips. In the end, he still chased after her. I'm sorry. When they were only a few meters away, Gao Yang, who wasn't even paying attention to walking, suddenly bumped into a boy who was running with something in his arms. With a "hua" sound, the things in the boy's arms fell to the ground and were flung to the side of their feet. Both of them were startled and reacted extremely quickly, bending their backs. Yi Qian had already dodged to the side. The boy who was bumped into wasn't anyone else, but a Vietnamese boy. Tell your classmate to leave, Yi Qian. Xia Jinyuan's cold voice suddenly came from the headset. Yi Qian, who originally planned to wait for the Vietnamese boy to leave, had a cold expression on his face as he strode out from the darkness. Chapter 176. The Vietnamese boy didn't look good, and his whole body exuded a deathly aura of despair. Yi Qian took a few steps closer, and his heart suddenly sank. A gust of night wind blew, and even the hairs on his back stood on end. Danger, danger, danger. A voice came from the bottom of his heart, and it kept stopping Yi Qian from walking over. There was danger, and it was a life-threatening danger. Why are you still here? The teachers are waiting for you to go back. If there was really danger, it wasn't her style to turn around and leave at this time. When he took a few steps closer, he saw that the Vietnamese boy's eyes, which were filled with despair because of her and Gao Yang's appearance, suddenly burst with a bright light like fireworks. The Vietnamese boy was holding one side of the black bag, and Gao Yang was holding the other. When he heard Yi Qian's voice, Gao Yang, who didn't feel anything wrong, turned his head. Yi Qian, why are you here? Because Yi Qian's appearance was too sudden, Gao Yang didn't notice that the Vietnamese boy was acting strangely. However, Yi Qian clearly saw that the Vietnamese boy's hand that was holding the big bag suddenly moved. As Gao Yang turned around, the originally bulging bag was unzipped, and a few things fell out. The Vietnamese boy opened the black bag by himself. Yi Qian's pupils contracted like needles. He saw the Vietnamese boy's deathly despair like a pool of water that was about to expand. Even though he was a few meters away, he could feel it. Gao Yang had already come back to his senses and realized that he had opened someone's bag. He hurriedly said to Yi Qian, "Wait a minute," and bent down to pick up the things that fell out. Before his fingertips could touch her, two figures rushed out from the dark side of the walkway and covered Gao Yang's mouth. The series of events happened in an instant, and Yi Qian didn't think much of it. When he saw Gao Yang being dragged to the side of the road by a car that screeched as it braked, he immediately ran after them. Xia Jinyuan's angry voice came through the earpiece, "Retreat. Yi Qian. It's too late, Captain Xia." Yi Qian, who had rushed out, saw someone rushing towards him at the same time. He quickly said, "Vietnamese boy, open the bag yourself. Gao Yang has been taken away. I have to chase after them." In the dark, Xia Jinyuan's handsome face was cold. "I will come and find you, Yi Qian." His low voice was as cold as a sword, but it also carried a mountainous promise. He knew that Yi Qian had made the right choice, because someone had to know where Gao Yang was. Yi Qian, on the other hand, was China's only choice. "I have never doubted," Yi Qian said softly. As she retreated in fear, she quickly pulled out the earpiece hidden in her long hair and stuffed it into the bag of sanitary pads and underwear. "I have never doubted your loyalty, and I have never doubted your promise, because you are an indomitable military man. You are the spear of the nation and the shield of the people. What are you doing?" "Save, She pretended to be frightened as she looked at the people approaching her. When her mouth was covered, she could only make muffled sounds from her throat. Then, she was taken into the car on this dark road where there weren't many people. Her voice came faintly from the earpiece, followed by a series of rustling sounds. Then, the earpiece returned to silence. Xia Jinyuan calmly said to Su Yu, "The plan remains the same. Hand the kidnapped student over to Yi Qian." Su Yu's palms were sweaty. "I trust you, so I also trust Yi Qian." Chapter 177. At a time like this, Su Yu knew very well that he had to treat Yi Qian as a comrade who would fight side by side with him. As long as he believed, there would be hope. Unlike when the international police found out that two students participating in the mathematical Olympiad had been kidnapped, there was only one word written on their faces: "We're done for." In their eyes, the kidnapping of two Chinese students was equivalent to the loss of two lives. There was no way to hide something like this from Director Li, so, now, Director Li and the other teachers were sitting in the room, their faces ashen. "So now, all we can do is wait?" he asked the international police. "Yes, sir, we can only wait." The international police, who was also the hotel attendant bell, looked at Director Li with a solemn expression. His face and tone were full of helplessness. "We can't take action immediately because Jane and another boy have fallen into the hands of a very troublesome criminal group." Director Lee felt his vision darken. He needed to contact the embassy, immediately. 2 students had been kidnapped and fallen into the hands of a very troublesome criminal group. Even the international police looked like they couldn't do anything. How could he trust them? He could only trust his own people. Director Lee naturally had the embassy's phone number. The embassy had taken care of the 12 contestants representing their countries in the mathematical Olympiad. The Chinese military had already called the embassy 5 minutes after Yi Qian was taken into the car. Director Lee called 10 minutes later and learned that the Chinese military had already taken action. Director Lee, who was standing on the phone, heard the news and sat down weakly on the bed. That's great. At the critical moment, his own country was still the most reliable. In the car, Gao Yang calmed down after struggling for a while. When he saw Yi Qian, who was also taken into the car, he knew that it was useless for him to struggle now. The people who took the 2 students into the car were foreign men. They were tall and strong, with thick whiskers that made them look like the same person. They did not pay any attention to the students who were taken into the car. Once they got into the car, they chatted unscrupulously. They spoke Australian English with a strong local accent, which made it convenient for Gao Yang and Yi Jian to communicate secretly. Gao Yang, who was close to Yi Qian, pursed his lips and whispered in Chinese, "Don't be afraid, they want money. Don't make a fuss at any time. If you want to cry, wait until they leave. Let's see where they take us first." After he calmed down, he still didn't understand that his kidnapping had nothing to do with money. However, for someone who had been kidnapped before, the scene in front of him was very similar. It was reasonable for him to think that he had been kidnapped for money. His calmness made Yi Qian look at him in a new light. It was rare for a young boy to be able to calm down after struggling for a few seconds. When encountering such a situation, it would be strange if you weren't scared at all. "You should at least cry a little," Yi Qian said softly. Her voice was muffled and sounded like she was about to cry. For a moment, Gao Yang could not tell if she was afraid or not. There were 4 kidnappers and a driver in the car. In addition, there was a man in the front passenger seat who had been talking to someone since he got on the car. The 6 people's attention was not on the 2 students. After the car door closed, they started chatting among themselves. Chapter 178. Yi Qian recognized the voice of the foreign man in the front passenger seat. It was the man she had bumped into when she was pushing the dining cart out of the elevator. He was one of the suspects wanted by the international police. "Yes, it's a bit bad, but we're lucky it's just 2 students." "Yes, that's right, we'll proceed according to the original plan. I don't want to wait any longer. Let Red Scorpion worry about the rest, ha ha ha." The man on the phone didn't try to hide anything. He said whatever he wanted to say and spoke in English. He wasn't afraid that the 2 kidnapped students would understand. Yi Qian's eyes darkened. The other party didn't care at all, which meant he wasn't afraid that they would spill the beans. Because dead people don't talk. She wasn't afraid. In her past life, she was bullied by Yi Ying until her guts were as hard as stone. She only knew how to survive and didn't know fear. In this life, at this moment, she really wanted to thank Yi Ying for what she had done to her in her past life. That was why Yi Qian was who she was today. Fearless, fearless. A pair of slender but cold hands quietly grasped her hand. Yi Qian instinctively wanted to shake it off, but the owner of the hand tightened his grip. It was so tight that she could feel the sweat in his palm on the back of her hand. "They didn't want money." Gao Yang's voice was trembling. Even though he was speaking in a muffled voice, Yi Qian could clearly feel the tremor in his voice. No matter how calm a 15-year-old boy was, he would still be afraid. Because he also understood why the man on the phone was so unscrupulous. Yi Qian sighed in her heart. In the end, she didn't pull her hand away. She had a problem with him. When she first arrived at school, he blamed her for angering Yi Ying to the point of being hospitalized. After that, although there were some misunderstandings, he still apologized to her after understanding that it was Yi Ying's little trick. From these points, Gao Yang could be considered a boy who understood what was right and wrong. Congratulations, you guessed right. So we can only wait for the right time. Yi Qian sighed softly, but she still slowly withdrew her hand. She was not used to holding it like this. Let's see where they take us first. At least for now, we're not in any danger. The plan did not change, which meant that the deal would still go on. Before the deal was completed, smart people would not do anything that would complicate matters, such as immediately killing the 2 contestants who came to Australia to participate in the Mathematical Olympiad. The Mathematical Olympiad was something that the entire state of Australia was paying attention to. No matter how arrogant the criminals were, it was impossible for them to commit crimes so arrogantly. Money was their priority. On the other hand, the 2 lives that were already in their hands could be dealt with at any time. Gao Yang had already pursed his lips into a straight line. He vaguely guessed that this kidnapping had something to do with the Vietnamese boy just now. If that was the case, then in the end, he had implicated Yi Qian. He glanced at Yi Qian slightly. Her long hair covered her dimples and all the expressions on her face. He couldn't see her expression clearly, and he couldn't guess what she was thinking. The only thing he knew was that she was not afraid and did not need to rely on him. From the moment she pulled her hand out without hesitation, he knew that she did not need his comfort at all. This Yi Qian was so unfamiliar, but so outstanding. The night was still dark. Nothing had changed because of some people or some things. As Director Li waited anxiously, Gao Yang was pushed out of the car. Chapter 179. When it was Yi Qian's turn to get out of the car, the bag she had been holding in her hand was grabbed by a pair of hairy hands. Yi Qian, who did not let go, directly took out a pack of sanitary pads from the bag. Crying and shy, she stuttered in English and said in fear, "Do you, a man, need this? Do you need it?" When the other 3 kidnappers saw it clearly, they burst into laughter. The man who grabbed the bag also laughed. Then he pulled out a gun from behind his waist and pressed it against Yi Qian's forehead. He said with a faint smile, "Kid, don't make me angry." With the gun pointed at her head, Yi Qian, who was calmer than ever, did not scream. Instead, she widened her eyes and tried her best to look as if she was about to faint from fear. In fact, Yi Qian's gaze was focused on the gun. She did not see the model of the gun in the man's hand. It was a Beretta M8000 American Lion F mobile phone. It had 15 rounds of ammunition. It was 180 millimeters in length and had the function to disable the hammer. She thought that she would need a gun for tonight's escape. When the hairy foreign man saw how scared she was, he laughed wantonly and made a soft, bang sound. When they saw how scared the girl was, they laughed even louder and wantonly. From their cold laughter, it was clear that they did not care about adding 2 more lives to their hands. "Okay, Gianni." The man who jumped out of the car from the front passenger seat glanced at Yi Qian with his brown eyes. His gaze fell on the feminine products. When he asked the kidnappers to let go, he gave Yi Qian a meaningful smile. "I think you won't need these things very soon." His voice was like a maggot's laughter. It made the kidnappers break out in cold sweat. "Okay, buddy. Since they're cooperating, stop teasing them. I prefer to settle things quickly. That's the best way." The kidnappers laughed, but they did not notice that Yi Qian, who was being teased, had a ruthless look in her eyes. Standing in the dark alley without even a streetlight, Gao Yang's face was so pale that a thin layer of sweat appeared on her forehead. Creak, creak, creak. A rusty iron door slowly opened. The silent night seemed to have been torn apart, and deafening heavy metal music rushed into the room. The two of them were pushed into a colorful world. The dance floor was filled with people who were crazily rocking to the music. The dazzling lights kept flashing, and the waves of music seemed to overturn the entire KTV. No one noticed the group of people appearing in the bar. The suspect walking in front even greeted the waiters in the bar. He passed through the dance floor without any hindrance and walked into the bar. After turning a corner, he stood in front of the shiny elevator door. Yi Qian was like a quail. His shoulders. All right, let's invite our children to sit in the next room for a while. We'll play with them after midnight. When the elevator reached the 8th floor, the man in the lead laughed. He even patted Gao Yang's shoulder and left arrogantly. This was his place. He could do whatever he wanted. When the door was locked with a click, Yi Qian, who was holding the bag, sighed in relief. Chapter 180. She had taken the initiative to take out the sanitary pads. Wasn't this a gamble? She was betting on a man's reputation, and she was also betting on how vigilant they would be towards her. As it turned out, she had made the right bet. With his back against the cold wall, Yi Qian let out a long sigh of relief. The locator and communication device were on him, so all that was left was to send the location to Xia Jinyuan. The international police. She really couldn't trust them. On the other side, Gao Yang was already looking around to see if there was an escape window. With a whoosh, he pulled open a thick curtain and saw a brown sliding glass window. He could vaguely see the street lights outside through it. Delighted, he immediately reached out to push the window, but the sliding window didn't budge at all. It was obviously sealed shut. Yi Qian, come here. Not giving up, he turned around and said to Yi Qian, who was leaning against the wall, glass, we have to find a way to pry it open. Gao Yang wasn't panicking, nor was he panicking. He still knew how to look for an escape. His performance undoubtedly made Yi Qian feel a little more at ease. There were no cameras in the room, so he didn't feel like he was being watched. With his back facing Gao Yang, Yi Qian put on the headset that was too far away and had no signal source. He then took out the locator that was smaller than the palm of his hand and entered a string of signals. Soon, there was a DDD sound. The code that was sent out went through a series of processing and transcoding before finally appearing on the server of Belle's laptop. Xia, over here. Belle was able to become the police officer who contacted Yi Qian at the hotel because he had worked with the Chinese military before. This time, when no one else was willing to step forward, he volunteered to cooperate with the Chinese military. Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu were both in the room. When they heard the sound coming from the server, the two of them rushed to the computer at almost the same time. They clicked, zoomed in, located, confirmed. It only took them 2 minutes to confirm Yi Qian's location. It's the King's Cross district, a place where drugs, brothels, and gangs run rampant. Damn it, it's all their own people there. It'll be difficult to save Jane. After Belle saw the location clearly, he clenched his fists and slammed them on the table. He said in annoyance, you still need to capture Red Scorpion. Xia, leave Jane's matter to us. After confirming Yi Qian's specific location, Xia Jinyuan secretly, he sighed and said to Su Yu, we'll leave in 3 minutes. He then said to Belle, thank you, friend. However, we can handle this matter. Let's deal with Red Scorpion first. Belle was not a frontline police officer, so it was impossible for him to go with Xia Jinyuan. Hearing this, he said worriedly, you need to be careful. The Sydney police have mobilized a lot of police forces here, but they still haven't succeeded. After thinking for a while, he took out a pistol from under the pillow on his bed. Take it, buddy. It'll definitely come in handy. Xia Jinyuan and Suyu had guns, but Yi Qian did not. Xia Jinyuan took the gun that was thrown to him and popped open the magazine to take a look. It was fully loaded with 15 bullets. After nimbly installing the gun, Xia Jinyuan raised his long eyebrows. There was a hint of elegance in his handsome yet cynical smile. It would be even better if there was a fully loaded magazine. It would make me feel more secure to have a replacement. Bell shrugged noncommittally. He smiled and took out a magazine from under the bedside table and threw it to Xia Jinyuan. Good luck, buddy. Chapter 181. At this time, groups of men and women of all kinds were flirting and frolicking on King's Cross Street. There were young men in short shirts and shorts, bare-chested women in sexy clothes, and office workers in suits and shiny leather shoes. They were also flirting with sexy women. Glasses of beer were not meant to be drunk, but to be drunk. Therefore, from time to time, one could see drunk Westerners singing and making a ruckus on the streets. Some of them even hugged a tree while twisting their waists and swaying their buttocks. It looked very ugly, but no one would laugh at them. This was a famous red light district. No matter what kind of behavior people did, they would be tolerated because it was not strange. The room was soundproof. No matter how noisy it was outside, the room was still quiet. After Yi Qian sent out the signal, she quietly waited for Xia Jinyuan's next instructions. He knew where she was and would definitely rush over. She trusted him so much. Take a break. We'll talk later. After she was done, she saw that Gao Yang was still trying to figure out how to open the window. Yi Qian sat on the floor and said calmly, "Take a break first." "What are you in such a hurry for?" After Gao Yang failed to open the window for the fourth time, he sat down. He did not sit close to her, but sat across from her. He frowned and stared at Yi Qian. "You don't seem to be afraid at all. Aren't you the same?" "You're not afraid." Yi Qian smiled faintly. She had always maintained absolute calmness and composure. You don't have to be afraid of things that have already happened and things that can be resolved. It's useless to be afraid of the unknown before it happens. He had thousands of questions to ask her, but they were all blocked by her one sentence. After a long silence, Gao Yang laughed self-deprecatingly. "You're right. I'm the one who doesn't understand." He seemed to have thought of something. A hint of sarcasm appeared on his cold face, and then he fell into silence. Yi Qian, who had her hand in the paper bag, did not respond. Her slender fingers moved slowly in the paper bag, and her fingertips gently slid across the gun. With a gun in hand, she felt very safe. If the window was locked, one shot could solve it, but not now. She needed to wait for Xia Jinyuan to contact her. She already had no idea where Red Scorpion and the Vietnamese boy were. However, one thing she was certain of was that, since the foreign criminal suspect who made the deal with Red Scorpion was here and had even said that he would take care of them after midnight. Red Scorpion and the Vietnamese boy probably made the deal in this area. The Chinese military had been keeping an eye on the Red Scorpions moving about outside, so the whereabouts of the drugs were definitely being monitored as well. Thus, what she needed to do was to wait quietly and then leave with Gao Yang. Outside, the Western man who had lost his pistol ran through the hotel and ran outside to look for the girl. After finding nothing, he cursed and returned to the bar. He had no idea when he lost his pistol, and he had no one to suspect. He could only blame himself for being too careless. Over here, private possession was legal. If someone really picked up a gun, it was not impossible for them to secretly possess it. Upstairs, the foreign criminal suspect had already made contact with Red Scorpion. Originally, he was supposed to make the deal at Red Scorpion's designated location, but he directly changed it to a bar. The reason was simple: his student was too disobedient. The Vietnamese student had already been beaten by Red Scorpion until he was curled up in the car. He did not even dare to cry out in pain. The other Vietnamese boy in the car hugged a black bag and trembled as he sat to the side. He was so scared that his entire body was shaking. Chapter 182. The driver was Red Scorpion himself. Changing the location of the transaction caused his originally gloomy eyes to reveal a frightening savagery. Without sparing the two students another glance, he stepped on the accelerator and headed straight for King's Cross Street. A pickup truck was even faster than him. With a rumble, it overtook him, then with a beautiful drift, it cut in front of him. It seemed like it was intentional, but also unintentional. It blocked Red Scorpion's fast-moving car. "G. King, it's your turn." On the pickup truck, Xia Jinyuan had a faint smile in the corner of his eyes. It was as if he was leisurely playing a car race, and he informed Jean Tu, who was moving with him, to overtake him. With a rumble, another pickup truck overtook Red Scorpion's car, then drifted directly in front of Xia Jinyuan. The expressionless Red Scorpion glanced at the pickup truck that kept overtaking and drifting in front of him. He stepped on the accelerator and turned into the outermost lane, turning into another road that led to King Cross Street. When Xia Jinyuan saw that he had successfully forced the other party onto a road that was not a shortcut, the faint smile between his brows gradually disappeared. His cold, dark eyes looked ahead with a sharpness as sharp as a sword, and he headed towards Yi Qian's location. The various men and women in the KTV were still dancing wildly and drinking in large mouthfuls. No one cared about the transaction in the dark, and even if they did, they wouldn't pay much attention to it. This was because this place itself was a drug-dealing place. At 9:40, Xia Jinyuan's low voice broke the silence in the earpiece. Yi Qian, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Hearing his restrained voice, he said with a faint smile, "Are you scared? Or do you find it very exciting? Captain Xia knows me well." His voice seemed to come from ancient times, bringing with it the power to make people feel at ease. In an instant, it made her tense heartstrings relax. "Everything is fine. They're locked in a room on the 4th floor of a bar. I think they'll be safe until 12 o'clock. After 12, I'm not too sure." Gao Yang, who was also resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes when Yi Qian suddenly spoke. He thought Yi Qian was talking in his sleep. Before she could say another word, Gao Yang stood up abruptly and looked at Yi Qian in disbelief. "Captain Xia. Who was she contacting? How was he going to contact the people outside?" Countless questions that he couldn't figure out kept popping up in his mind. Looking at the faint and leisurely smile at the corner of her eyes and the unhurried conversation, Gao Yang, who got up so abruptly that he felt a little dizzy, almost thought that he was hallucinating. They're all fine. They're students, after all. They were kidnapped halfway through their journey, so they're not that vigilant. You guys go first. I still have the ability to protect myself. It was only slightly more than an hour after she had located the location of the abduction, but he had already arrived. It could be seen that he did not waste even a minute. She knew that he would definitely come. She had never doubted it. When Xia Jinyuan heard her slightly immature but exceptionally calm voice, he knew that his little fox was safe and sound. His cold, handsome face revealed a faint and warm smile. "Okay, wait for my good news. We'll meet before 12. He was telling Yi Qian that he would not let her wait until the moment of danger. He would definitely meet up with her before the danger came. A man's promise didn't require a solemn vow. It was more reassuring when it came inadvertently. If I could get out on my own, I wouldn't have troubled you to come. Yi Qian, whose smile had not faded, replied with curved eyes. Her bright crescent-shaped eyes were like those of a cunning fox, full of spirit. This is a rare opportunity for actual combat. I want to participate in it myself. Chapter 183. What a bold little fox. She wasn't afraid at all. Xia Jinyuan, who was hiding in the dark and waiting for the net to be reaped, gave a low laugh. His elegant eyebrows were relaxed. Okay, be careful. Since she wanted to fight her way out, he would give her a chance to do so. He would clear the obstacles outside and ensure her safety before she came out. Gao Yang had already moved closer to Yi Jian's left side and slowly sat down. His gaze fell on her ear as he stared at it closely. You can contact the outside world. It was a completely affirmative sentence. Yes, I can. Yi Qian lifted her long black hair, revealing a small black earpiece. It's our military personnel. They're outside now. They'll come find us after they've dealt with the outside before midnight. Gao Yang trembled slightly and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his handsome eyes were filled with self-mockery. So, all we have to do now is wait, right? Then why did you say that if you could, you wanted to go out by yourself? He wanted to ask, but he couldn't. She could contact the outside, but during this hour of torment, she kept silent and didn't tell him. What did this mean? That she didn't trust him? Or was it that he wasn't even worth a single word from her? That kind of helplessness made Gao Yang feel deeply frustrated. Not only was there helplessness in his tone, but there was also a trace of anger. Yi Qian narrowed her eyes slightly and looked at him indifferently. She chuckled. I didn't tell you because if you didn't contact us, you would only feel more uneasy. I'm not hiding anything from you now. I've already told you that someone will come to save us. You just have to wait patiently. She paused. Seeing that he was trying his best to hide his fluctuating emotions with indifference, her cold smile deepened. If no one contacts me, this communication device is useless. What she meant was, rather than letting him have hope in the beginning, why not give up hope in the beginning? Because when hope was shattered, he would be the one hurt in the end. Gao Yang's expression froze. He suddenly lowered his gaze weakly, and his straight shoulders slumped lightly. He had nothing to say. What she considered was far beyond what he could have thought of at that time. She still knew how to take care of her own feelings at a time like this when she was about to break down. Gao Yang lowered his head and smiled bitterly. Just as his father had said, his so-called intelligence and inviolable self-esteem were just a joke in the eyes of others. He didn't ask any more questions, and Yi Qian didn't say anything either. Whether or not he could understand was his business. He had already made it clear enough. Time passed bit by bit, and at 10:30, Red Scorpion appeared near the KTV. Beside him was a student who trembled as he walked. Pass through here. Remember, one hand for the goods, and the other for the money. If you don't get the money, you don't have to come back. The boy's lips trembled slightly. He still wanted to say something, but when he saw the ferocious look on Red Scorpion's face, he hugged the black bag in his hand and walked step by step towards the end filled with evil. He couldn't turn back, and Red Scorpion, who had never personally come forward to trade, definitely wouldn't allow him to turn back. Here we are, Nick. Someone closed the open window and informed Nick, who was waiting for the goods in the KTV. He was the #1 target that the international police had to capture. Red Scorpion still had his student deliver the goods. Nick, who was smoking a cigar, took a deep breath. His rugged face revealed a ferocious look. He crossed his muscular arms over his chest, revealing the green beast head tattoo on the side of his arm. Tell him that my patience is limited. This meant that he wanted Red Scorpion to personally deliver the goods. Chapter 184. They were all venomous snakes, so they carefully exited their holes and revealed their fangs. The entire process was done in an extremely secretive manner, leaving no traces and no one would be able to catch them. But for Nick, after what the Vietnamese student did, he didn't want a third party to be involved in the transaction. Red Scorpion didn't want to leave any evidence, and he didn't want to lose the goods either. The heavy metal music continued. Some people came in and some left. Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu, who were proficient in Japanese, entered the colorful dance floor, which was filled with perfume and sweat. Red Scorpion's figure was right in front of them, and in front of him was his own student. Underage children entering the adult world didn't seem to attract much attention. Outside, the international police were dispatched. Less than 2 minutes after Red Scorpion went in, Xia Jinyuan appeared in the kitchen of the bar. He was like a cheetah that had walked out of the grassland. He silently knocked down a large pastry chef wearing a long white chef's hat. When he came out again, he was also wearing a white chef's outfit, a white apron around his waist, and a long white hat. He lightly patted the chef who was fiddling with a plate of desserts on the shoulder. "Hey, is this done?" "Okay." The pastry chef who was about to turn around suddenly felt a heavy blow on the back of his neck. Another pastry chef was knocked unconscious and finished off the job. A fire alarm suddenly rang, and thick smoke rose from the kitchen. Several pastry chefs in the bar all fainted on the ground, waiting for the international police to drag them away. Elimination complete. In the kitchen, Xia Jinyuan took off his white chef's outfit, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it directly into a pot of boiling water. His hat was also thrown into the pot. Disinfecting and erasing evidence, it was a very good method. 2 smoke grenades were thrown out, and the smoke alarm in the entire kitchen suddenly rang. Then, the fire alarm in the entire KTV rang loudly. The ear-piercing alarm wasn't covered by the heavy metal. A towel soaked in alcohol was ignited and thrown in the passageway leading to the kitchen door. The dancing men and women heard the fire alarm and smelled the burning smell. At the same time, screams rang out and chaos broke out in the crowd. The international police officers who blended into the crowd took control of the situation. They acted like experienced guests who were trying to escape, guiding the screaming crowd away. The bodyguards working in the bar immediately rushed to the kitchen where the alarm sounded. Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu, who had been waiting for a long time, swiftly acted as the vanguard. Before the bodyguards could take out their guns, they had already taken care of them. Upstairs, Nick received a call from his bodyguard. "Fire." "Are you sure?" Red Scorpion, who was about to hand over the goods, moved quickly. He immediately took back the bag and rushed out of the door with almost no hesitation. This was an extremely vigilant venomous snake. Even the slightest movement would make him shrink back into his cave. Outside, the siren sounded like an unfamiliar intruder, breaking the extravagance of King's Cross Street and announcing their arrival, warning the criminals that they had been surrounded. When the Chinese soldiers outside heard the sirens that came out of nowhere, their expressions changed as they contacted Xia Jinyuan. "Q King, the international police are acting without permission. The sirens have been sounded, you must be careful." The Chinese side sent out a total of 5 soldiers to carry out the mission. 2 of them were outside keeping an eye on Red Scorpion, Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu were in the hotel, and Yi Qian was among the students. It could be said that they cooperated quite well, but they ran into a group of self-righteous international police officers. Chapter 185. Xia Jinyuan froze when he heard the news from his comrade waiting outside. Switch to the public channel. According to the plan, they needed to wait until they found Yi Qian and Gao Yang before the international police could show up. Now that these guys had stirred up trouble, even the usually well-mannered Xia Jinyuan wanted to beat them up. Xia Jinyuan switched to the public channel and immediately contacted Yi Qian. Chaotic sounds came from the headset. Yi Qian, who had also heard the sirens outside, no longer sat on the ground to rest. Instead, he stood up immediately. Roger that. Don't worry about me. I found a pistol. I can protect myself. Found a pistol. Xia Jinyuan crouched on the stairs on the second floor and stood guard. Su Yu was standing on a high stool he had gotten from somewhere. He was fumbling with a fire alarm light. After 2 minutes, he gave Xia Jinyuan an okay sign. Xia Jinyuan nodded slightly and gestured for them to move forward. When he heard her words, a smile flashed across his eyes. Good job, little girl. We are now on the second floor. The international police have surrounded the ground floor. You can leave through the escape window. Hearing his cold voice, Yi Qian turned off the lights in the room. He walked past Gao Yang, who had woken up, and stood in front of the window. Bang! With a cold gaze, Yi Qian fired a shot at the glass. The tempered glass shattered under the force of the bullet. Then, spiderweb-like cracks spread all over the glass. Yi Qian lifted his leg and kicked the glass lightly. When a footprint appeared on the spiderweb-like glass, Yi Qian turned to Gao Yang and said, "Take off your shirt and give it to me. Quick." He couldn't be sure if there was anyone down there, so he could only use his bare hands to dig the glass into the room. Ever since Yi Qian fired the shot, Gao Yang's expression was one of shock and astonishment. Yi Qian said sternly. He had no choice but to obey. After he took off his short-sleeved uniform, he saw her wrap her hand with the uniform. She put a finger through the bullet hole and hooked it into the room. With a few clattering sounds, Yi Qian's gentle hooking force shattered the entire piece of glass in the room, leaving only a frame that only one person could pass through. Outside, there was no anti-theft net installed like in China. The flashing police lights illuminated the room. Yi Qian shouted at the motionless Gao Yang, "Quick, jump out of the window." Gao Yang, who had been stunned by the gunshot, heard her shout and quickly rushed over. "Okay, follow me closely. Put on your clothes." Yi Qian didn't say much. He just threw the clothes back. "Move quickly. Don't panic. There are international police officers outside." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from outside, followed by 2 gunshots. The shots hit the door lock and made it fall off. Seeing that something was wrong, Yi Qian quickly loaded her pistol and pulled Gao Yang behind the door. The room was dark. When the enemy kicked the door open, a figure rushed in with a murderous aura. He rushed to the window that only had a frame left. After taking a quick look, he cursed, "Fuck you." He turned his head and shouted at his partner standing at the door, "Damn it. They escaped." He cursed and rushed out again. The man standing at the door quietly raised his hand and pointed behind the door. After counting from 1 to 3, he suddenly turned the light switch back on. The dark room was lit up again. Chapter 186. The man who hadn't left the room pulled the door open and saw the 2 students he thought had escaped standing against the wall. With a furious expression, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Qian without hesitation. "Fuck you." Gao Yang saw this and didn't have time to be afraid of the gun in the man's hand. He instinctively raised his hand to block the slap aimed at Yi Qian's face. Bang! A familiar gunshot suddenly rang out. The man who had raised his hand to hit Yi Qian suddenly froze and fell to the ground with a loud thud. Only 30 seconds had passed. When the man at the door heard this, his expression changed. He quickly dodged outside and fired randomly into the room. Gao Yang was so shocked that he felt like his soul had left his body. He heard the gunshot and saw someone fall to the ground. Large amounts of blood began to flow out of his chest. The Western man who had wanted to kill Yi Qian a moment ago had become a bloody man. His fingers were still trembling and his eyes hadn't even closed. Blood flowed out of his mouth and flowed down his neck, wetting the man's thick beard. Multiple bullets were fired into the room. Gao Yang's eyes were wide open as he forcefully pulled his gaze away from the bloody man and forced himself to look at the bullet hole on the floor. His hands were tightly clenched into fists. He used so much strength that he couldn't stop his body from trembling. Yi Qian didn't have time to pay attention to his expression. There were only 15 bullets in the gun. Her gaze fell on the dead man's hand. He still had a gun in his hand. She needed this gun. After the random gunshot stopped, Yi Qian turned her head to look at Gao Yang, who was so shocked that his pupils were dilated. "I'm going to shoot outside now. Pick up the gun and give it to me." Gao Yang didn't know how many more times he was going to be scared tonight. He slowly shifted his gaze and looked at Yi Qian. Just now, he saw with his own eyes Yi Qian shoot one of the kidnappers without even blinking. She was so calm and practiced, it was as if she had done this countless times before. Her movements were swift and fierce, and her eyes were ice cold. Her entire body was emitting an aura that made his heart tremble. Even if she ordered him to pick up the gun, he couldn't refuse. "Okay." She nodded lightly and answered dryly. She trusted Yi Qian quite a bit. Yi Qian calculated the trajectory of the bullets in his mind, then looked at the closed door and said, "You've learned Taekwondo before. Show some dexterity. When I count to 3, roll over and pick up the gun." "All right." Gao Yang swallowed his saliva. His cold expression had already cracked. Under Yi Qian's cold and sharp gaze, he nodded solemnly. "Okay. Shooting, killing." Yi Qian didn't give Gao Yang a chance to accept it. At a time like this, every second was the key. After counting from 1 to 3, she lifted her leg and kicked the door open again. At the same time, she dodged to the side of the door and fired 3 shots outside. The bullets pierced through the door and into the kidnapper's left shoulder. A scream came from outside. Gao Yang was so nervous that his palms were covered in cold sweat. He picked up the gun and rolled over to Yi Qian's side. Gunshots came from outside the room again. Chaotic footsteps passed through the bullet-holed wooden door and clearly reached Yi Qian's ears. Chapter 187. At the same time, Xia Jinyuan's voice could be heard from the earpiece. "Yi Qian, calm yourself down, don't panic. You're still the same as how you usually shoot." "Okay, I still have someone ambushing me outside, let's get my classmate to leave first." Yi Qian took the gun from him and replied calmly, "I can't leave for now, I have to cover the rear." He removed the magazine and took a look. Not bad, there were 13 bullets in it. He looked at Gao Yang, whose neck was dripping with sweat. Without waiting for Xia Jinyuan's reply, he pursed his lips and said to Gao Yang, "Get down from the windowsill, I'll cover the rear." "No." Gao Yang refused directly, "I can't be at ease if I leave you here." Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and said in amusement, "Did you see me scared when I was killing people just now? Also, when I counterattacked, you should have heard someone screaming outside when you picked up the gun." The bullet I shot hit his left shoulder. After careful calculation, I shot to make sure there was no mistake. "So, Gao Yang, you have to leave, I can't take care of you anymore." Xia Jinyuan and the others were still in the bar. She could roughly tell from the public channel that the international police did not care about the lives of the Chinese soldiers and directly took action. There was no movement outside, but they couldn't stay put and not leave. Under Yi Qian's urging, the pale-faced Gao Yang retreated step by step to the window. He heard Yi Qian's cold voice and shouted again, "Leave now." Gao Yang supported himself with both hands on the windowsill. His actions seemed to be instinctive as he propped himself up and left the room. Even when the glass pierced his palms and the sharp pain stimulated his nerves, he did not wake up from his daze. From holding the hose down to sliding to the ground, to being rescued by the police in the car, it was as if his entire being had been emptied. Upstairs, Yi Qian held 2 pistols and forcefully pulled open the door. After shooting randomly, she saw the bullet holes on the ground increase. After seeing the bullet specifications, Yi Qian gently curved the corners of her mouth. The USM-9 pistol produced by the Meberetta Company had 9 by 19 mm ammunition and 15+1 rounds loaded. Now that the bullet holes on the ground increased to 12 rounds, there was a short pause. This is the moment. While the other party was reloading, Yi Qian rolled on the ground a few times. Lying on her back on the floor of the corridor, she fired her gun at an extremely fast speed. She fired 2 shots consecutively with both hands, destroying the lights in the corridor. Following the trajectory of the bullets, Yi Qian calmly fired a shot in the direction where the bullets came from. There was a muffled sound, followed by a plop sound. Someone had already fallen to the ground. She was on the 4th floor, while Xia Jinyuan was on the 2nd floor. Yi Qian did not know how many targets there were on the 4th floor. After taking care of 2 burly men with guns, Yi Qian spoke to Xia Jinyuan. 2 targets eliminated on the 4th floor. The exact number of targets is unknown. On the 2nd floor, Xia Jinyuan heard the gunshots through his earpiece and knew that she had taken action. It would be a lie to say that he was not worried. The target is on the 6th floor. Girl, you must remember to hide on the ceiling above the corridor. I'll come and find you. No matter how worried Xia Jinyuan was, he did not show it in his words. He also did not tell Yi Qian that he and Su Yu were the only ones who entered the KTV. He also did not tell Yi Qian that their combat style was actually assassination and shooting. Chapter 188. Su Yu was in charge of shooting and clearing while Xia Jinyuan was in charge of the assassination. The 2 of them cooperated seamlessly and went straight up to the 4th floor to rescue Yi Qian. But now that she was out, her comrades outside could hide on the 6th floor. Soon, Yi Qian heard Xia Jinyuan say in a low voice in the public channel, G3, Operation Coiling Snake, the 3rd step of Operation Stone Crushing. Coiling Snake. That snake here naturally referred to Red Scorpion. Coiling was equivalent to killing. The Vietnamese military didn't need to care if Red Scorpion was dead or alive, as long as he was captured in the end. News from the Vietnamese. 1 student was successfully rescued from the car, and the other student is still in the hands of Red Scorpion. G3's voice was different from Xia Jinyuan's low voice, but it also contained a hint of elegance. His voice was a bit hoarse, like the edge of a knife scraping against a whetstone. Just hearing it made one feel that this person was not to be underestimated. Hearing this unfamiliar voice for the first time, Yi Qian, who had already turned around to hide on the ceiling, held his breath. She was holding a gun like this. It was actually illegal. She didn't know if it would affect Xia Jinyuan. Another person spoke, and it was also an unfamiliar voice. Looks like we have to meddle in other people's business again. J5 received, Operation Coiling Snake commencing. G3, J5. Q King. Why was Xia Jinyuan the only one with Q King, which meant King of Elites? Is the little girl still there? If she is, say something to me. J5's style was a little different. It was less cold and hard, but more casual and bad. If you're still on the 4th floor, find a place to hide. You must remember your brother Xiao's words. Hide well on the ceiling. Your brother Xiao will come looking for you soon. Be good. Although it's cool to hold a gun, bullets will hurt a lot when they hit your body. J5 was an instructor. One day, he insisted on switching positions with the company commander. From then on, he no longer forced the soldiers to do ideological and political work. He was even more obsessed with the glory of the battlefield than the company commander. In his own words, it would be very cool for a man to run a lap on the battlefield. Super cool. Countless female soldiers bowed to him. When Xia Jinyuan heard that J5, who usually liked to tease female soldiers, was teasing the little fox that he had his eyes on, his dark eyes darkened. He said with a faint smile, J5, I heard that you got a 1 last week. I'd like to go back and spar with you. Please enlighten me, student Yi Qian, please be careful. Believe in the People's Liberation Army and believe in Captain Xia. They will definitely save you. Also, look for me if you don't have enough bullets. Over. The J5 style changed again. It was full of coldness, and the sharpness of a soldier was fully displayed in its words. As the subject of their conversation, Yi Qian felt that there was no need for her to remain silent any longer. She hid her emotions well and smiled faintly. Thank you for your concern. They say that it's better to rely on yourself than on others. I've always liked to help myself. You have backbone. Not bad. G3 laughed. In the darkness, his and J5's hidden figures were like fierce beasts on the hunt. He threw out a climbing rope and hooked it onto a building. He gestured to J5. He grabbed the rope with both hands and agilely climbed up to the 7th floor in an instant. After confirming that the surroundings were safe, he replied to J5, who was covering the rear downstairs, with a strange sound that sounded like a rock falling on plastic. J5 put the submachine gun behind his back and nimbly climbed up to the 7th floor. Done, brothers. Wait for our good news. J5 was a soldier who was relaxed at all times. He had a small personality that was different from ordinary soldiers. After he finished speaking, he didn't forget to say to Yi Qian, Student Yi, G3 rarely praises people. Q King was the first to be praised by him. You're the second. Not bad, good luck. Chapter 189. For some reason, Yi Qian suddenly thought of the laughing J5 as the young people who liked to act cute on social networks in his previous life. Thinking about it, he shivered and couldn't bear to look at it directly. Xia Jinyuan had already quietly flanked the back of a gun-wielding bodyguard. While his left hand covered the bodyguard's mouth, the military dagger in his right hand silently cut across the bodyguard's neck. The sharp blade cut through the warm skin, cutting through the bodyguard's trachea and jugular vein without a trace of obstruction. Blood flowed onto the dagger, and the warm blood sprayed onto his wrist. The thick and strong smell of blood didn't stop Xia Jinyuan's footsteps. He dragged the dead bodyguard to a room on the 2nd floor, closed the door, and headed to the 3rd floor. Killing people was a very terrifying thing, but for them, they were on the front lines. It was either you die or I die. As they fought for justice, even if their hands were stained with blood, there was no turning back. Mercy wasn't used on the enemy. Clear. Walking to the 3rd floor, Xia Jinyuan, who had cleared out 2 hidden guards, lightly tapped the microphone. Su Yu, who had brought up the rear, climbed up the stairs and switched to him as the vanguard to continue clearing out the targets. After taking care of another drug gang member, Xia Jinyuan directly took off the bulletproof vest he was wearing, and gave it to Little Fox. The elevator to the 6th floor had already stopped moving. Nick, who had gotten up, tugged at his t-shirt. Looking at Red Scorpion, who had rushed out of the door and was now closing in on him amidst the shrill sirens, he smiled fearlessly. "Buddy, if you rush out now, I can guarantee that you won't leave here alive." His brown eyes coldly swept over the black bag in Red Scorpion's hand. "Give me the goods, I'll give you the money, and we'll leave together. How about it?" "Why should I believe you?" Red Scorpion's face didn't show much panic. He glanced at the student standing at the door, already frightened to tears by the sirens, and coldly snorted. "You said that the transaction was 100% safe. What about now? We're already surrounded. Why should I believe you?" Red Scorpion was about the same as the majority of Vietnamese. He had a medium build, and his forelimbs were thick and short. However, his explosive power was extremely strong. His 2 arms looked short and small, but the muscles hidden under his shirt were filled with power. He stared at the calm and composed Nick, and his purplish-black lips curled into a cruel smile. "I'm willing to bet that not only are there international police officers outside, but there are also people inside the KTV. Maybe someone has already sneaked into this building and is ready to take your life at any time." "Yes, buddy. You're right. Someone has already infiltrated this building." Nick shrugged his shoulders, maintaining the venomous smile on his face. "But I'm not afraid at all. Come, let me show you what I'm capable of." As he spoke, he clapped his hands, and the wardrobe door on the right wall suddenly opened. A Western man with brown hair and brown eyes, wearing black sweatpants and a tank top, walked out with his back bent. "Everything is ready. I'm waiting for your orders. Come, buddy." Nick took the lead and bent down, walking into the wardrobe. After that, Red Scorpion also walked in. Seeing the scenery in front of him, he laughed out loud. "Working with you is indeed very reassuring. I always thought, no, I think everyone, including those stupid international police, had been deceived by you, brother." This was a computer room, and at the same time, an armory. Chapter 190. As Nick raised his hand, the 24 surveillance screens that had been black all this time lit up in unison. What appeared on the screens was nothing else but the situation of the entire building. They could clearly see the situation of the entire building, including the KTV and the kitchen. Hidden at the end of the corridor on the 4th floor, Yi Qian, who was on the ceiling, suddenly felt like he was being watched. His hair stood on end. He lowered his head and looked at the fire emergency light with a weak green light. He saw a small red light flashing. That was an infrared sensor and an infrared night camera. Yi Qian's heart suddenly sank. He suddenly understood why the killing of the 2 people and the shooting didn't attract the attention of other drug gangs. The people she killed were clearly the top target of the European investigation. They were pawns that could be abandoned at any time. They were even pawns that could be used at critical moments. "Girl, there's a bit of trouble outside. Hide on the ceiling and don't move around." Xia Jinyuan said to her calmly, "Hide well. Before I say you can move, you must hide well." "Okay, I know," Yi Qian said softly. He told the Chinese soldiers who were all watching the public channel what he had discovered. "If I'm not wrong, the entire building is filled with infrared cameras, infrared sensors." Xia Jinyuan was sitting on Su Yu's shoulder. He was biting a delicate but extremely sharp knife in his mouth. His slender hands, which were wearing half-finger combat gloves, were modifying an infrared sensor. After hearing her voice, Su Yu smiled and replied, "I'm dealing with it. Don't worry, it'll be done soon." This little girl's sensitivity was really amazing. He turned off his microphone and said to Xia Jinyuan, you can even find out like this. You're really good. Of course. Don't you know who wanted you? Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows and smiled. Under the helmet, his handsome face was calm and gentle. Hide well. I'm dealing with a small matter on the 3rd floor. This was Nick's base camp. When the international police still insisted that Melbourne was his base camp, the Chinese side tried to persuade them to no avail. Fine, forget it if you don't believe me. Let's do our own thing. If he really listened to the international police, his steel-like body would have dozens of bullet holes. Case 7, can you say something? I'm a bit tired from being hung up. I can feel the blood not only flowing to my head, but also to cough cough cough. J5's voice came again, but before he could finish, G3's fist landed on his chest. What he wanted to say turned into a low cough. He wanted to say that blood was flowing to a certain part of a man. There's another case 7 with 26 English letters as its code name. Yi Jian didn't think too much about what J5 wanted to say. Instead, she focused on case 7, who hadn't spoken a word. About a minute later, case 7's voice came lazily. Hearing it, Yi Jian felt a chill run down her spine. Not only was it cold, but it also gave off a feeling of death. You live, and they die. That was case 7's original words. J5 rubbed his chest and jumped down. He rubbed his arms and said softly, every time I hear you talk, I feel like I'm a dead object on the dissection table, waiting for you to dissect me with a scalpel. Chapter 191. In front of them, several infrared sensors were still moving back and forth. J5 stuck close to the wall and completely ignored the sensors that could detect them. Since case 7 had given the order, they were free to pass. 2 black bodyguards were in front of them. After J5 and G3 made a hand gesture, they quickly approached the 2 black bodyguards. Their hands shot out at lightning speed, one on the left and one on the right, strangling the 2 bodyguards' necks. They exerted strength in their arms and lifted the bodyguards, who were at least 9 meters tall and had a strong physique, off the ground. Cracking sounds could be heard from their fragile necks. The black bodyguards struggled with their feet off the ground. Their hands were already clinging tightly to the 2 men's iron arms. In the end, their tongues were sticking out, and the whites of their eyes kept rolling up. In the end, their arms and legs were hanging limply. After finishing them off, they gently put them down, then dragged them up and hid them in a dark corner. It wasn't an easy task to get from the 7th floor to the 6th floor. They used assassinations to clear the way. In the end, they stood at the fire escape door leading to the 6th floor. J5 and G3, who were wearing combat uniforms, were already sweating profusely. Under the dim emergency lights, they saw 2 pairs of black eyes with the same expression. They were calm, fearless, and fierce. The 7th and 3rd floors were cleared almost at the same time. There was still a 5th floor that needed to be cleared by Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu. On the 4th floor, Yi Qian, who had been lying motionless, saw the fire escape door gently open. Then, a slender and imposing figure appeared in his line of sight. The familiar figure made Yi Qian's eyes shine in the dark like a meteor streaking across the night sky, bringing dazzling brilliance. Captain Xia, I'm here. Without needing him to speak, she had already recognized the figure. A clear voice came from the ceiling above. Xia Jinyuan's gaze stopped at a certain spot in the dark. He smiled and said, "Do you want to come down? Or do you want to stay here?" She was happy. Even though they were in the dark, Xia Jinyuan could feel it. There was a rustling sound from the ceiling. After a buckle was removed, Yi Qian jumped down from the ceiling and landed lightly in a half-squat. "Let's go together." It's not safe to stay here. She wasn't afraid of killing people, so she wasn't afraid to continue walking. Then follow me. Xia Jinyuan chuckled and handed over a black bulletproof vest that didn't fit well. Put it on. It doesn't fit well, but it's still good for you. Yi Qian didn't refuse. She had seen this kind of bulletproof vest on the 2 kidnappers she had taken care of earlier. If it wasn't for the fact that it was stained with blood, she would have taken it off and put it on. Outside, the sirens were still blaring. Someone stood out and shouted through the loudspeaker, "You've been surrounded. You'd better surrender and come out." If he really wanted to surrender, he would have come out a long time ago. Yi Qian sneered. He stuck close to the cold figure in front of him and approached the 5th floor. On the 6th floor, Red Scorpion listened to the voice that he loathed and said through gritted teeth, "I think we can teach them a lesson right now." Damned voice, it's so unpleasant to the ear. He stared at the surveillance screen, where he could clearly see the streets near the building. "Did you hear that, my weapons expert? Our partner, I hope you can teach those rats outside a lesson." Nick enjoyed the feeling of making the international police feel helpless. Look at them, what a bunch of trash. He looked at the corner of the room. Only then did Red Scorpion realize that there was someone there. Judging from his back, he wasn't a Westerner. He probably had the physique of an Asian. His back didn't move. He only raised his hand and snapped his fingers as an answer to Nick. Chapter 192. All passers-by were prohibited from entering this area, and even the nearby residents were evacuated by the police. Only the small 7-story building was tightly surrounded, and there were even helicopters circling around on the top floor. The target was inside, and the international police were acting with the determination to capture all of them. Following Nick's loud laughter in the room, several loud boom sounds suddenly exploded from nearby. A police car was directly thrown into the air by the heat wave, and then smashed into another car with a bang. In less than a minute, countless explosions sounded in the surroundings. This is my territory. Even though I won't be coming back, I still have to say that I really like this exciting and depraved place. Nick smiled cruelly in the midst of the blazing flames. This is my territory. Even though I won't be coming back, I still have to say that I really like this exciting and depraved place. Red Scorpion sneered disapprovingly. If we take everyone as hostages, we'll leave even faster. No, I hate using hostages the most. Ha ha ha, I prefer to directly confront those self-righteous fellows. Nick was not like Red Scorpion, who liked to act alone. He invested a lot of manpower and resources to tease the international police who were no different from rats in his eyes. The international police, who were originally full of confidence, were instantly shaken by the 4 explosions around them, and all of their faces tightened. The commander began to roar loudly, and the sound of ambulances filled the entire sky of Sydney. The entire city's police force was mobilized, and all of the entrances to King's Cross Street were sealed off, entering a state of high alert. Damn it, where are the explosives experts? Hurry and get them here. God! There's still a bomb here. Hurry! A police officer began to call for help with his walkie-talkie, but before he could finish, the bomb was manually detonated, causing the officer who was on the phone to directly lie under the car door. Among the rocks that rushed into the air, his voice was distorted. Manually detonated. Can't get close. The international police had loudspeakers, and so did Nick. His voice was transmitted through the speakers outside the KTV, and he laughed loudly. I hope you like my present, cute rats. If you have fun, I don't mind giving you my present again. His voice was cold and cruel like a demon's, causing the faces of the international police officers hiding under the cars, behind the trees, and behind the buildings to turn the color of pig liver. This was humiliation. They were being humiliated by a criminal. Yi Qian didn't know why, but when she heard that, she felt quite relieved. K7's cold and emotionless voice came through the earpiece. He mentioned Yi Qian's name directly. "Hey, Yi Qian, you're small. Go through the ventilation duct and give them a few smoke grenades." Then, without waiting for Yi Qian to reply, she told him the location of the ventilation duct from the 4th floor to the 6th floor. He then said to Xia Jinyuan, "This is a good arrangement. Does Q King have any objections?" "K7, you're talking too much. Focus on your work. Be careful, you might expose your identity." J5's voice was no longer as casual as before. Instead, he cut him off coldly. "Also, you have no right to assign a student to complete the mission for us. She's still a student. No matter how capable she is, she's still a citizen that we need to protect." In the past, as a political instructor, once he discovered that his comrade's behavior was out of line, he had to immediately stand up and stop him. Chapter 193. K7, who was hiding somewhere, was silent for a while before he said, "Sorry." Then he didn't say anything else. After secretly taking care of the 4 people on the 5th floor, Xia Jinyuan raised his hand and shielded Yi Qian behind his arm. Under Su Yu's vigilant gaze, he said calmly, "The 5th floor has been cleared. I agree with K7's plan, but I'll go over. This place is too small." Yi Qian was already standing at the vent. Xia Jinyuan walked over to take a look, then squatted down and patted his shoulder. He said to Yi Qian, "Come, sit on my shoulder and use it to pry open the seal." Yi Qian looked at Su Yu, who was holding a gun, then looked at Xia Jinyuan, who was already squatting down in his combat uniform and helmet. He bit his lower lip and didn't hesitate anymore. He took the military knife from Su Yu's hand, took a deep breath, and sat on Xia Jinyuan's shoulder. After prying open the seal, Yi Qian narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "You can go in. All 3 of you can go in." After saying that, she held the sides of the opening with both hands and leaped into the air like a fish, entering the vent. K7, inform the international police. Let them do as they see fit. Grabbing Yi Qian's arm, Xia Jinyuan jumped up with 1 foot on the wall and climbed up the vent again. "Su Yu, go." After K7 tampered with all the infrared rays, the 3 of them disappeared right under Nick's nose. After 5 consecutive explosions, red flames could be seen rushing over King's Cross Street in the sky above the city. Gao Yang, who was struggling violently in the ambulance, was forcibly injected with a tranquilizer by the medical staff. He was directly pushed into Sydney's best private hospital, a private hospital that the Gao family owned 25% of the shares in. When Director Li, who was waiting in the hotel, heard about this, he clasped his hands together and prayed, "God bless." Now, he just had to wait for Yi Qian, who was with the Chinese soldiers, to come back. Director Li was finally relieved to see him with his own people. Outside the KTV, Nick proposed a deal. It was very simple: leave safely. His request happened to be something that the international police could not agree to. They could only stall for time and quickly arrange for the team to enter the KTV. Smoke grenades were thrown in one after another, and the fire alarm continued to ring sharply without stopping. "Where are the soldiers from the Chinese side? Tell them to contact me immediately. Right away." The commander of the operation was a white man. At this time, he was so angry that he was like a mad lion. He roared, "Damn it, where did they go? Damn it! Why let them get involved? God, let them go to hell." As the commander-in-chief of this operation, he had an undeniable responsibility for the 5 consecutive explosions. However, it was not over yet. The other party still had explosive points and extremely lethal weapons. Last time, who was the one who said that the damn Nick was active in King's Cross Street? His roars were transmitted from the walkie-talkie to the commander at the scene. Even through the line, he could feel his saliva flying everywhere. The commander at the scene was a European police officer. When he heard this, he puffed out his cheeks and sighed heavily. He said with a serious expression, "Yes, sir." The Chinese soldiers suggested it, but unfortunately, no one believed them. Including you, who chose not to believe them. All the international police officers who could hear the conversation were silent. They all remembered. Now we need to contact them because they were the first to enter. Oh, wait a moment. There's an emergency call. The commander at the scene took the walkie-talkie. Before he could speak, a cold and emotionless voice came from the other side. It was K7 who had contacted him. At this time, Xia Jinyuan, Yi Qian, and Suyu had just entered the vent. Chapter 194. K7 was a soldier who didn't like to talk nonsense. No matter where he was, he always had a lifeless expression on his face. At this moment, the commanding officer only felt that K7 was extremely cute. "Okay, no problem, we will cooperate fully." "Okay, I will arrange for someone to send it over immediately." Okay, we understand. Now, let's start the operation immediately." The good news made the commanding officer's solemn expression disappear. After K7 ended the call, he handed the communicator to his officer. After the cross-section of the building was sent to the international police, the 30 vanguards directly cut into the 6th floor, while the 20 vanguards rushed in from the 7th floor. K7, who was still in contact with Xia Jinyuan, looked behind him and sent a message on his phone. "The sniping operation has begun." On the opposite side of the building, someone looked down at the message and whistled happily. He set up his sniper rifle and put his blue eyes close to the scope. The cross in the scope was aimed at a certain direction. As long as the main target appeared, he would immediately open fire. On the 6th floor, Yi Qian, who was lying on his stomach, could clearly see the number of people walking back and forth in the corridor through the ventilation blinds. He already knew the number of people, but now he had to wait for a very important item. He had to wait for the international police vanguards to send the gas masks over. Only with the masks could they throw down the smoke grenades and tear gas grenades. The elite vanguards moved very quickly. In addition, everything on the 1st floor had been cleared out. The 2 vanguards who were responsible for delivering the gas masks also carried a 30-round Immerse submachine gun that was specially provided to the special forces. After Yi Qian received it, he suppressed his surprise and skillfully checked the gun. Under Xia Jinyuan's orders, he had already prepared 2 smoke grenades, 2 flash grenades, and 2 tear gas grenades. They were all thrown out at the same time. Q King, broken wing. G3, who had broken into the 6th floor, had a cold expression. They cooperated seamlessly and started the operation together. The international police vanguards broke into the door from the right and fired directly. G3 and J5 broke into the door from the left and fired directly. The entire 6th floor was plunged into an intense gunfight. In the room, Nick, who was still feeling pleased with himself, heard the gunshots outside. He looked at the surveillance screen that didn't show any abnormalities at all. His face instantly contorted. He slapped the face of the staff operating the surveillance system and roared, "Motherfucker! Give me the rocket launcher." Red Scorpion's reaction was even faster. They snatched the drugs from Nick's hands in an instant and threw back the box containing US dollars that they had traded for. He firmly believed that the goods were the safest in his hands. Pulling his student over, he picked up a machine gun and started shooting at the escape window. "Damn it, what are you doing? When Nick saw this, he immediately waved his hand to signal his bodyguards to stop Red Scorpion's foolish actions. You want to run? Suit yourself. Don't drag me into this, you idiot. Blow them all up. Motherfucker, you're playing with me. As Nick roared furiously, 2 tear gas grenades and 2 smoke grenades appeared out of thin air in the bulletproof and explosion-proof room. In an instant, the entire room was shrouded in thick smoke. The tear gas made everyone unable to open their eyes. Up there, motherfucker. Shoot, up there. Someone shouted, but he choked on his tears and his nose kept flowing, and he even coughed. The people in the room were like living targets as countless bullets rained down. The international drug cartel's higher-ups, led by Nick, were almost completely wiped out in this encirclement. Chapter 195. Red Scorpion, where do you think you're going? After everything was cleared, someone appeared and pointed his gun at a cabinet. His cold voice was as calm as a pool of stagnant water. Come out, Red Scorpion. Behind the cabinet was Red Scorpion, who had one hand tightly covering his student's head. He didn't move, as if there was no one hiding behind him. The cold eyes of the person who spoke didn't waver in the slightest. He didn't give Red Scorpion a chance to think, and directly fired 2 shots at the cabinet. My patience is limited, Red Scorpion. Don't test my patience. This was K7's voice. His face was thin, and his skin was sickly pale as if it had never been exposed to sunlight. His eyes, which were staring at the metal cabinet, were black, sharp, and filled with cold killing intent. There was movement behind the metal cabinet, and Red Scorpion walked out with his student. When he saw who was standing in front of him, his pupils contracted. It's you. It was Nick's weapon expert. After seeing who it was, he pressed the gun against his student's head even harder. He stared coldly at K7. Who are you? You won't live no matter how many hostages you have. K7 directly ignored his question. He pulled the trigger lightly, and his thin lips moved slightly. In his eyes, Red Scorpion was already a cold corpse. Before you die, don't drag others down with you. It was standard American English. Surprisingly, K7 spoke much more elegantly when he spoke English than when he spoke Chinese. Give me the student, and the rest is up to you. In return, Red Scorpion laughed contemptuously. He directly pressed his gun against the Vietnamese student's head, and the hole left a green crescent moon mark on the boy's temple. Do you know who he is? The son of a big shot. Ha ha ha, you can talk to him right now. See if he wants his son back alive, or shipped back as a corpse. His words made K7 furrow his brows without leaving a trace. His thin but extremely delicate face became even colder. The hostage in Red Scorpion's hands is said to be the son of a big shot. They've hidden the identity of the Vietnamese student. Fuck, I knew these bastards were unreliable, G3 sneered, and said to K7, the hostage is in our hands. Stay calm and wait for us to arrive. K7's black eyes stared at Red Scorpion without blinking. His hands that held the gun were also aimed at the center of his target's forehead. No need. Clean up the weapons outside. Leave this place to me. This was the room where Nick had first made his deal with Red Scorpion. The tense atmosphere became increasingly tense under the boy's terrified gaze. Time ticked by, and after about 5 minutes, K7 heard the identity of the hostage. His brows were tightly knitted together. He seemed to be in a difficult position, but in fact, his tense gaze had relaxed a lot. The vents of every room were connected. Yi Jian, who didn't jump down from the vents, moved her body gently under Xia Jinyuan's instructions and entered the central air conditioning vent that was so narrow that only girls could enter. Continue forward, Yi Qian. Don't look back. I'll wait for you in front. The low voice, one word at a time, slowly, and with a penetrating force, came through the earpiece. Yi Qian listened to Xia Jinyuan's voice, and her eyes were filled with determination. His voice was like light, able to pierce through the darkness, piercing through the shade. It carried a warm force, encouraging her. Chapter 196. With him behind her, as well as the soldiers that belonged to her own country, she felt so at ease. Now, all she had to do was pass through the air duct in front of her and she would be able to enter the room where Red Scorpion held the hostage. Yi Qian only lightly tapped the side of the microphone rhythmically, telling them that she was fine and that they didn't need to worry. There was already sweat on her temples. Nervousness, excitement, and excitement. Under these three emotions, Yi Qian's delicate lips lightly pursed. Then, she lightly breathed in the slightly turbid air and continued forward. She's fine. Case 7, keep a close eye on her. Xia Jinyuan said to everyone, including Case 7 who was currently confronting Red Scorpion, she's inside. I'll hand her over to you. Hearing this, Case 7 indifferently blinked his eyes, as if he had agreed. Red Scorpion had been uneasy for a long time. His elbow was tightly wrapped around the Vietnamese student's neck, strangling him to the point that the student's breathing suddenly became difficult. He wanted to gasp for air, but because of the lack of oxygen, his face was flushed red like a stranded fish. He didn't even have the chance to struggle. After 2 minutes, the hostage in your hands will die from lack of oxygen. As for you, Red Scorpion, you still won't be able to escape. Case 7 was indifferent to this, as if the hostage in the enemy's hands was actually a puppet. In the narrow air duct, Yi Qian's back was already drenched in sweat as she crawled. Even though she was wearing a gas mask, she didn't stop. Using her shockingly flexible body to pass through a right angle, she paused for a moment to adjust her breathing. Then, she moved to the air duct where she could clearly see Red Scorpion's back. Outside, everyone was on high alert. The representative sent by the Vietnamese military was already so anxious that his forehead was covered in cold sweat as he prayed non-stop. The Vietnamese special forces that had already entered the building rushed in front of the international police, using their own bodies to prevent the international police from ignoring the only son of one of their country's military ministers in order to eliminate the drug kingpin. This was a battle of wits. For the Chinese military, they were fully prepared. Eliminating all of them in one fell swoop was definitely not a problem. Outside, the international police and the Vietnamese military watched through the thick smoke as they held their guns tightly and guarded the side of the engine room. In front of the hidden cabinet door that led to another room, a police officer stood up and said in a very troubled tone, "Right now, there's only one target left. We don't want to steal your credit, but we want to complete the mission perfectly. Chinese military, the only son of our country's minister, if anything happens, can you take responsibility?" The Vietnamese soldiers were extremely nervous. They were currently riding on a tiger's back, so they had to be extremely careful. The confrontation between the two sides, Xia Jinyuan's eyes, and their gazes became colder and colder. J5 laughed coldly, "What's credit?" "Sorry, I don't understand." "And you, all of you, if you want to rush in, sure. Come, take a look at the situation inside the house." J5 walked to the only surveillance screen that hadn't been destroyed. His 10 fingers tapped on the keyboard for a while, and the originally still surveillance screen flickered a few times before it instantly cut into the next room. "Used to us," he said to the red to look. "Of course, you'll have to deal with the consequences yourself." J5's smile was like a spring breeze, but the meaning behind his words was as cold as ice, suffocating the people around him. Xia Jinyuan had already put away his gun, and said indifferently, I think, with the strength of the international police and the Vietnamese military, and with so many people charging in together, it shouldn't be impossible to save a hostage. G3. Inform our people to retreat. Chapter 197. This was a good move, allowing them to clearly see the situation in the room across the surveillance screen. Xia Jinyuan calmly ordered the Chinese people to retreat in English. However, the first to panic were the Vietnamese soldiers. Wait, please wait. Afraid that the Chinese soldiers confronting Red Scorpion would retreat, the Vietnamese soldiers quickly apologized. Sorry, I apologize for our recklessness. When the international police also apologized and pleaded with Xia Jinyuan for help from the Chinese soldiers, Yi Qian, who was holding his breath, smiled. He had said before that he would make those who looked down on the Chinese side beg the Chinese soldiers to help them. Tonight, he really did it. That's right, not only were his words worth 1,000 pieces of gold, every single one of them was true. How could a great country be looked down upon by others? The dignity of the country, the dignity of the people, how could they be looked down upon by other countries? Yi Qian put away the faint smile on his face, the cold black bullet hole aimed at Red Scorpion's back through the slender gap in the ventilation net. There was no wind, the temperature was normal, the visibility was high. The distance was close, one bullet hit the heart, and the other hit the back of the head. Now was the time. Shooting at close range didn't require any scopes to observe, it relied on aiming and strength. When Yi Qian, who maintained a high level of calmness, fired the first bullet, the second bullet was only 30 seconds away from the first bullet, and the second bullet hit the back of Red Scorpion's head. Blood, like a mist, exploded with a boom. Even though there was clearly some distance between them, Yi Qian felt as if the blood had filled her eyes, and the entire world was blood red. It was as if she didn't know anything, but also as if she couldn't see anything. Only the mist of blood and the exploded head and neck kept brushing past her eyes. Close-range shooting. 2 consecutive shots, no matter how tough his life was, he should be dead by now. The international police and Vietnamese soldiers who were watching the surveillance screen were stunned, and then they all subconsciously looked towards the ventilation vent in the room. Judging from the position where Red Scorpion was shot, there was another soldier on the Chinese side hiding in the central air conditioning vent. How could he crawl through such a narrow space? Outside, the sound of sirens could be heard. Inside, it seemed to be exceptionally quiet. Yi Qian blinked and looked at the handsome face that had suddenly appeared before his eyes. He blinked again and then chuckled softly. Sweat flowed into his eyes, but with the mask on, it was not convenient for him to wipe it off. Looking at him, Yi Qian was breathing heavily, as if he could not catch his breath. Red Scorpion's miserable state was still lingering in his mind, as if it was branded in his mind. Even though she knew that she had made the right choice, just like how she had shot the 2 of them earlier, when she saw the huge, bloody hole on the back of his neck, it hit her heart and made it difficult for her to breathe. What a bold little girl. She was scared. Don't look, girl. Xia Jinyuan, who was standing on the table and using violence to remove the ventilation blades, looked at her palm-sized face that was completely drained of blood. He stretched out his slender hands and said in a voice as calm as the morning bell, "Come, give me your hands. I'll carry you down. Don't look, close your eyes." 2 consecutive shots, especially the gunshot wound on the back of his neck. It was especially terrifying and bloody. This child was scared. Xia Jinyuan, who was suppressing his heartache, grabbed Yi Qian's hands and coaxed her gently, as if he was coaxing a baby. "Come, a little closer, I'll hold you. Be good, just a little closer." Chapter 198. He didn't say it out loud for fear of hurting her, so he spoke carefully, as if he was protecting the apple of his eye. Xia Jinyuan's voice not only had the power to penetrate the darkness, but it also had the effect of calming people's hearts. Yi Qian thought to himself as he blinked his eyes. He exhaled a mouthful of foul air that seemed to be stained with blood. When he saw Junia's worried eyes, he smiled slightly. "I'm fine. It's just my first experience, so I'm still in the process of adjusting." She had shot 2 people in a row previously because she knew that if she was discovered, both she and Gao Yang would die. She had no choice but to deal with the enemy and save her own life. This time, she was fully prepared, but she still overestimated herself. Yi Qian reached out and grabbed his hand tightly. He smiled bitterly. "Captain Xia, I want to take off my mask and take a breather. There's sweat in my eyes, and it's uncomfortable." It wasn't as if she didn't sweat during training, but she couldn't help it this time. There was no smoke in the room, so it was fine for her to take a breather. Her soft voice made Xia Jinyuan's heart ache. This girl was too strong, so strong that it made his heart ache. "Okay, take it off and take a breather," he replied gently. He put down his hand and gestured for his comrades below to open the windows and let in some fresh night air. Su Yu and the others heard her words and could hear the slight tremor in her voice. A 14-year-old girl should be wearing a beautiful floral dress with her black hair tied up high. She should be the apple of her parents' eye. This girl, even if she was afraid, she still knew how to comfort the men first. K7 turned around and opened the tightly shut windows to let the night breeze in and disperse the stench of blood in the room. Perhaps this would make this 14-year-old girl, who was as brave as a soldier, feel a little better. When she took off her mask, Xia Jinyuan saw her pale face and pale lips. His heart felt like it was being pricked by needles. "Come, let's sit aside and take a breather. The space here is too small, so it's not comfortable to lie down." Without the love and protection of her parents, how could she be so strong today? How could he not feel sorry for her? Yi Qian rubbed his eyes gently and breathed in for a while. After he felt a little better, he moved forward. As soon as he popped his head out, he felt several nervous gazes looking at him. Lowering his head, he saw a few young soldiers of about the same height, wearing the Army Special Forces uniform, staring at him without blinking. While he was sizing up the room, the wardrobe door that was supposed to be closed suddenly opened. 2 Vietnamese soldiers walked over, and the smell of smoke grenades and tear gas filled the room. Yi Qian, who was not wearing a gas mask, felt a sharp pain in his eyes in just a few seconds. Then, tears flowed out uncontrollably, stream after stream. Xia Jinyuan's eyes turned sharp and he said in a cold and sharp voice, "Back off." Not only did his voice carry the authority of a soldier, but it also carried an irresistible deterrence. The Vietnamese soldiers who came in carelessly shrank their necks and subconsciously shrank back into the room behind the wardrobe. K7 walked over, touched the wardrobe door, and fixed it in place. He said, "Take him down first, then send him to the hospital for a checkup." Chapter 199. He looked up at Yi Qian, who was tearing up because of the smoke from the tear gas grenade. A trace of pity flashed through his eyes. "I'm going to see Coach Joseph. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Coach Joseph was the Russian soldier who had set up the sniper rifle on the opposite building. He had come to the Chinese army to train the soldiers. Yi Qian, who was crying with her eyes closed, recognized K7's voice. When she could open her eyes, K7 walked away from the window. "You're so touched. Come on, let me give you a hug." J5, who was standing on his tiptoes, tried to stretch out his arms to signal Xia Jinyuan to carry the girl down and put her in his arms. Yi Qian knew it was J5 from his voice. She also heard Xia Jinyuan reply with a faint smile, How many good sisters do you have? How many more brothers do you want to be? He then whispered in her ear in a voice that only the two of them could hear, close your eyes and let out all your fear. Yi Qian, who had put on the gas mask again, didn't answer. She couldn't cry either. She was being held in his arms. The awkwardness now exceeded the discomfort she felt before. Downstairs, Su Yu, G3, and J5, who were standing by the table and looking up, raised their hands, ready to receive Yi Qian at any time. No need. You guys clean up the scene. I'll take her out first. Xia Jinyuan, who was holding Yi Qian in his arms, didn't ask for help from his comrades. He jumped down steadily and left the scene without looking back. G3 looked up and said to J5, "Is he coming to our team?" "Yes, the king of soldiers." J5 pulled on his helmet and looked at the slender figure leaving. He said with interest, "That's right. I heard he's only 20 years old. His personal information is confidential. Other than the political commissar, no one knows. His background is not simple." He clicked his tongue. Under the gas mask, his peach blossom eyes were shining. Q King is not bad. But I think that little girl is better. His IQ is high, and his courage is unique. So you didn't know any of these people? He was sent from the Yun Province's Armed Police Border Defense Force. Standing next to these soldiers, who were of the same height, he was secretly surprised and said in a deep voice, "I'm afraid the other target has heard the news and didn't appear in this transaction. This time, I'll have to trouble you all. On behalf of the Yun Province's Border Defense Police, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you." This was a matter of Yun Province. Xia Jinyuan and the others were actually providing support. "We won't be separated, we won't be separated. We're all one family. What's there to thank?" J5 laughed heartily as he spoke, pointing at Red Scorpion's corpse. "Let the Vietnamese army take care of this themselves. Let them bring this student back as well. Our final mission. Let's go, my comrades. Let's go meet the insufferably arrogant white commander." After waiting for a few minutes, the Vietnamese army and international police came in. All they saw was a Chinese soldier, a hostage rescued by the Chinese soldier, and Red Scorpion's corpse. After watching the two Special Forces soldiers leave the window, Siu turned around and began to talk to the Vietnamese army. The international police ran to the open window and looked down. They found nothing. The Chinese soldiers who appeared on the surveillance screen had suddenly appeared and mysteriously retreated. It was as if they had never appeared. Chapter 200. The night breeze with the smell of gunpowder blew in through the open window. Outside, the sirens were still ringing through the night sky. The international police officers standing by the window leaned their whole bodies out of the window, but they did not see the other Chinese soldiers who were confronting them, nor did they see the Chinese soldiers hiding in the ventilation vent. "Sir, they have left," someone on the intercom said softly. He was telling the commanding officer at the scene, "I'm sorry, we're still a step too late." He disappeared into thin air, leaving not even a trace behind. During the confrontation just now, the Chinese soldiers were all wearing gas masks, so it was impossible to see their faces clearly. Now, there was no way to know where they had gone. This feeling caused them to feel a chill in their hearts. There was an uncomfortable feeling pressing down on their hearts, but they had no one to complain to. Were the Chinese soldiers weak? Were they really weak? No one could answer, only they could answer themselves. The commanding officer at the scene was momentarily stunned. Disappeared. Disappeared. God! When did the international police officers become unable to find a few living people? Xia Jinyuan, who was carrying Yi Qian, had already escaped several waves of police officers who had entered the building. He stopped by the side of the elevator that had started operating and saw a few Australian police officers who were investigating the scene walk out of the elevator. He hid in the dark and waited until they left before walking out. Little did he know that Yi Jian, who had been in his embrace all this time, had already become dizzy. Not only was her head dizzy, but her little face was also flushed red like a peach blossom, and it was crimson red. The air in the building was not very good. When the international police officers rushed in, they threw smoke grenades everywhere as if they were free. Now that it was over, the air was still filled with smoke. Yi Qian guessed that he had stayed in the building for too long and that the gas mask he was wearing was not working. Otherwise, why would he feel so dizzy? The dizzy Yi Qian was like a little turtle hiding in its shell, using this method to hypnotize himself. When he was about to walk out, Yi Qian calmed himself down and coughed softly. "Captain Xia, I can walk on my own. You don't have to carry me all the time. I'm not used to it. Are you sure your legs aren't weak?" Although he was joking, he still respected Yi Qian's wishes like a gentleman. He bent down slightly and put her down. "If you can't walk, just let me know. I still have the strength to carry you." She was very light and very thin. The first feeling he got when he held her in his arms was that she needed to be well nourished. Yi Qian instantly felt that his breathing had become much smoother after leaving his embrace and losing the warmth of his body. His mind, which had felt like it had been stuffed with cotton, was no longer as dizzy as before. He gradually regained his clarity. As expected, a dangerous man really couldn't get too close. She was held in his arms like he was protecting a treasure. Her entire body was floating. When her feet landed on the ground, it was just as he said, her legs were a little weak. However, it was absolutely impossible for her to admit that her legs were weak. He smiled. "If I really can't walk, I won't be polite with Captain Xia." She wouldn't be polite with him. That would be strange. This little girl was as cunning as a fox one moment, as a fish the next moment, and as pitiful as a little rabbit the next moment. It was really difficult to understand what she was thinking. "Okay, you're welcome to be polite at any time." Hearing that her tone had regained its usual indifference, Xia Jinyuan, who was slightly relieved, regained his sense of humor. "You must know that as a man, I'm born to serve beautiful girls. Little girl, I'm always welcome to be polite with you." Chapter 201. The humorous Xia Jinyuan is back. Yi Qian breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. His vigilance, which had gone off somewhere, instantly returned. The elegant and humorous Xia Jinyuan was the Xia Jinyuan he was most familiar with. Just as he secretly thought this, Major Xia, who had regained his humorous demeanor a second ago, became exceptionally serious in the next second. He took off his gas mask and stood under the faint light. His handsome face appeared exceptionally cold, and his eyes were like cold stars as he stared coldly at the exit in front of him. "I'll cover for you later and divert their attention. J5 and the others have already left. It's not suitable for the members of our operation group to appear in public, and you, little girl, can't show your face either. Because all the international police outside think that you've already been rescued and sent to the hospital along with the other kidnapped Chinese student." After Gao Yang came out, the Chinese soldier told the international police in order to protect and hide Yi Qian. After all, Yi Qian was only a student who could inform the police of Red Scorpion's activities in the hotel. Moreover, no one would believe that Red Scorpion, which was a headache for the international police and the Vietnamese military, would actually die at the hands of a high school student like Yi Qian. It wasn't because they were afraid that others wouldn't believe them, but because they were worried about Yi Qian's personal safety. The entire building was filled with international police officers. Yi Qian, who was a few steps behind, saw Xia Jinyuan walk in and was stopped by the police officers standing behind the police cordon for routine questioning. He didn't say a word and directly stretched out his arm. A brightly colored miniature version of the national flag with 5 golden stars made the interrogating European police officer stand at attention, raise his hand, and salute. He didn't ask any more questions and let the interrogating officer in. He also had a walkie-talkie hanging in front of his chest. Xia Jinyuan pointed at the walkie-talkie and smiled politely. I need to borrow your walkie-talkie to say a few words to your commanding officer. Of course. The police officer didn't hesitate at all. He looked at the Chinese soldier with admiration in his eyes and handed the walkie-talkie over. After Xia Jinyuan thanked him, he took it and leaned to the side to block the police officer's view. At the same time, he was able to see Yi Qian's movements. He restrained his polite smile and no longer spoke in a warm tone. Instead, it was filled with an inviolable coldness. It was the hard and cold expression of a Chinese soldier. He said to the international police commander on the scene, "Please tell your commander-in-chief that the thing he wants is in the hands of our soldiers. If he wants to get it, please apologize to our soldiers first." His voice was piercingly cold and resounding, striking the hearts of everyone present. He spoke in standard American English, and anyone with a walkie-talkie could hear him. At the same time, his words made the European police officers who had once thought that the Chinese soldiers were incompetent feel ashamed. If he dared to say such words, he definitely needed to have a certain level of confidence. Xia Jinyuan returned the walkie-talkie to the European police officer who was already embarrassed. He smiled again and did not forget to maintain his politeness and said, "Goodbye." His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to attract the attention of the police officers on duty. They saw Yi Qian stick close to the wall and nimbly hide behind a tree. She didn't immediately come out. She was like a little fox that came out of its cave. After looking around vigilantly, she lightly jumped across the warning line parallel to the green ribbon and successfully avoided the sight of the police officers. Watching her leave, Xia Jinyuan's lips curled up slightly. She's strong and agile. No wonder she's a reserve soldier, trained by a first-class sergeant and the world's best sniper. Chapter 202. After setting up the cordon, Xia Jinyuan walked out and saw Yi Qian hiding behind a tall wall from the corner of his eye. He walked over with a gentle smile in his eyes. The ambulance arranged by the Chinese side drove over under his instructions. The doctors and nurses in the ambulance were all from the embassy. After Yi Qian got into the ambulance, they immediately gave her a simple checkup. After they were done, they gave Xia Jinyuan an OK hand sign to indicate that everything was normal. The two of them sat in front of the ambulance and pulled down a layer of cloth. Xia Jinyuan casually placed the gas mask to the side. He looked at the little face in front of him that had regained some color. His thin lips curved into a perfect smile. "Your heart rate is correct. It looks like you're really not afraid anymore." Major Xiao's smile was very lethal. Just now, she had been dizzy from his minty scent, and now, she saw his warm smile. What a dangerous man. Yi Qian lowered her head silently. She rubbed her wrists and smiled. "Yes, I'm not afraid anymore if I don't think about it. Little girl, congratulations. You're one big step closer to becoming a qualified soldier." He smiled faintly. He raised his hand and gently rubbed her head. His voice became more serious. "Also, even though I can't reward you for this operation, your achievements will be forever recorded in the military files. Everyone will be proud of you." Yi Qian was only 14 years old. She had gone through a kidnapping, sacrificed herself to save others, participated in an operation, and fearlessly killed the top target. At 14 years old, she had done things that no one else her age could surpass. Yi Qian felt that this was good. She nodded and said calmly, "This is good enough. I don't need to be rewarded, and I don't need too many people to know about it. This is very good. The glory that belongs to you will always belong to you. Accepting everything calmly will make it easier for you. Little girl, you have a very good attitude." Yi Qian was indeed very suitable to join the military and become a soldier. At the hospital. When the 4 guards sent by the embassy saw the ambulance arrive, they immediately went out to greet it. Inside the ambulance, Xia Jinyuan confirmed that no one was following them before he removed the gas mask from Yi Qian's face. He said in a low voice, "Don't show your face. The embassy guards will escort you back to the hotel. When you go back, don't tell anyone about what happened tonight. I still have things to deal with here. I'll come back tomorrow afternoon." He patted Yi Qian's head gently. "Have a good rest and think about tomorrow's exam." Yi Qian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I thought you would ask me to rest and not take my exam tomorrow's exam. Little girl, the exam is the most important thing for a student. Don't think too much." When Xia Jinyuan heard this, his handsome face smiled deeply. He saluted the 4 guards and returned to the ambulance without looking back. When Yi Qian came out of the ophthalmology department, he saw Director Li pacing back and forth in the white corridor. A middle-aged man with a cold expression was sitting in a chair. It was Gao Yang's father. He had specially come to thank Yi Qian. He was shocked that a young girl could remain calm in such a situation and give the opportunity to leave to a boy. This was a hospital that the Gao family had a large stake in. When Gao Yang's father asked the doctor about Yi Qian's condition with a serious expression, Director Li's eyes were already filled with tears. "It's good that you're fine. If you didn't come back, I would have been lying in the hospital." Chapter 203. "It's fine, we're all with our own people. Let's go, Director Li. It's too late and we still have exams tomorrow." Yi Qian smiled. At this moment, even though the hospital was filled with the smell of disinfectant, she still felt refreshed. After Father Gao understood the situation from the doctor, he turned his head and saw the teacher and student preparing to leave. He quickly caught up to them. "Director Li, this female student, it's too late. I'll get the driver to take you back." It was almost 1 in the morning. No matter what, he couldn't let the female student who saved his son's life leave by herself. This time, Director Li didn't refuse. Father Gao seemed to be relieved. His cold gaze fell on Yi Qian's face and he revealed a gentle smile. "You're willing to give life to others and leave danger to yourself. I want to ask for money to express my gratitude. To you, it's a form of humiliation. But if I don't express my gratitude properly, I'll feel uneasy. Student Yi Qian, how about this? I'll use your name to provide a scholarship of $1 million to a middle school student in a disadvantaged area. What do you think? A scholarship of $1 million. Director Li faintly sucked in a breath of cold air. A scholarship of $1 million multiplied by 8 times the current exchange rate. Director Li, who had finally calmed down, felt like she had to take another heart-strengthening pill. The exchange rate in July 1995 was 1 million. It was a lot of money. After calculating in her heart, Yi Qian, whose eyes were already curved into crescents, said generously, "Actually, I also need money. After all, the amount you're offering is quite tempting. However, it's pretty good as a scholarship. I'm very grateful for your generosity. I think I should also study hard for your scholarship." Her gaze was open and her eyes were clear. Even though she said she needed money, he still felt that she was natural and unrestrained. This made Father Gao's impression of Yi Qian even better. He let out a rare laugh and sighed. People die for money, and birds die for food. This has never changed since ancient times. But a gentleman who loves money has a right way of obtaining it. Not only do you have a good character, but you're even better. Okay, Uncle will set up a scholarship for you. As long as you do well, this scholarship will be yours. You're thinking too highly of me. Yi Qian really didn't expect Father Gao to think so highly of her. She smiled politely and replied, "There are many outstanding students in our country who can't go to school because of tuition fees and family burdens. I think they need the scholarship you set up." After a brief moment of shock, Father Gao said, "How about this? I'll set up a charity organization that provides scholarships for outstanding and impoverished students in the country. We'll mobilize the overseas Chinese to contribute to the future of our country. What do you think?" This was indeed for the best. Our country does need such a charity organization. We also need the help of overseas Chinese from all over the world. Yi Qian reached out her hand like an adult and said with a sincere expression, "Thank you very much for your help. With your help, more students will be able to enter the school." An important matter was settled just like that. Director Li, who had not interjected at all, was dumbfounded. Gao Yang was still under the effects of the tranquilizer. Gao Yang's father promised to send him to the hotel at 7:30 a.m. sharp the next morning. After that, Director Li left with Yi Qian in the car. Chapter 204. Don't think about anything when you get back. I asked Teacher Yu to warm some calming tea for you. Drink it when you get back. Mr. Gao had been present just now, so Mr. Li had restrained himself a little. But now, he began to nag. He was still worried that something would happen to his student, so he kept comforting him. Everything's over now. We came back safe and sound. You, just treat it like a dream. When you wake up tomorrow, nothing happened. Yi Qian didn't interrupt, but listened with a smile. Occasionally, she would obediently say, "Okay." She didn't have the coldness of a gun-wielding girl anymore. She was completely an obedient girl. When they returned to the hotel, they didn't disturb the other students. Whether it was the Chinese students or the students from other countries, they didn't know that Yi Qian and Gao Yang had gone through a disaster. What happened in the middle of the night didn't affect the contestants who went to bed early. The next morning, Yi Qian appeared in front of her classmates as usual. No one knew that she had returned to the hotel at 1 in the morning. When Yang Yi saw her, she immediately came over. "Dear, can I sleep with you tonight? I found out that I'm sleeping in the same room as Teacher Yu. Why do I have insomnia? You don't have freedom in romance anymore, do you?" Yi Qian smiled and saw through her thoughts. "The first night I slept with you, I helped you pick up your books twice in the middle of the night. You're quite relaxed. Tell me, where did you hide them?" Before coming to Australia, the 4 teachers had specially checked the students' luggage, afraid that the students would bring books that had nothing to do with them. In the end, there were still some that slipped through the net. Yang Yi, who was startled, looked around guiltily and pulled Yi Qian to a corner. "Oh my, you even found out. Good sister, I'll definitely thank you when I get back to the capital." The students hadn't all arrived yet, so the 2 of them huddled in the corner and whispered. Hurried footsteps sounded, and they heard Gao Yang ask the other students, "Did Yi Qian come down? Did you see her?" Yi Qian. "No, I didn't see her after I came back from looking for you last night." Wouldn't he be suspicious if he looked for her in such a big way? Yi Qian leaned over to take a look. Seeing that he was about to ask the other students, she quickly raised her voice. "I'm here. What's the matter?" "This Gao Yang, looking for you early in the morning is like looking for his mother. TSK, TSK, TSK. I'm afraid there's something urgent. I'll go eat breakfast first. As Yi Qian snickered, Yang Yi waved at Gao Yang, who was striding over. Come. Over here, over here. I'll abdicate my position, and you can talk. On the other hand, Gao Yang, who was supposed to arrive at 7:30, was only staring at Yi Qian. He didn't even spare Yang Yi another glance. After he hurried over, he lowered his voice and said, "You came to the hospital last night, but I didn't know anything. I'm sorry, Yi Qian." His eyes were still red, as if he had just cried. His expression was also somewhat haggard, as if he had not slept well the entire night. "I'm fine. It doesn't matter if you know or not." Yi Qian saw that more and more students were coming and going. He pointed downstairs and said, "Let's talk outside. We can't let anyone know about this. It could be considered a secret between her and Gao Yang." They didn't leave the hotel. They were right in front of the fountain. With the sound of the fountain as a cover, and with the volume lowered, it was a very good place to talk. "I'm fine here. You don't have to worry. But why do you look like you didn't sleep well last night?" Perhaps it was because of last night's experience, but when Yi Qian looked at him again, he wasn't as cold as before. He could even stand and talk to him calmly. "It's not a big deal. Yesterday's matter should be fixed on yesterday. Take me for example. If I don't think about it, it won't affect me." Chapter 205. Under the sunlight, her eyebrows and eyes shone brightly. Her skin was so fair that it seemed to glow like a pearl. What made him unable to look away were her bright eyes. Just like last night, they carried a coldness that he had never seen before. Her gaze was like an arrow that pierced straight into his heart. He couldn't help but listen, he couldn't resist. Yi Qian was so unfamiliar that it was as if they were meeting for the first time. Also, the way she held the gun made it seem like she was used to holding a gun, no different from a police officer or a soldier. Skilled marksmanship, shooting without hesitation. Calm response, nimble handling. She was not the Yi Qian that occasionally bickered with Ying in school. After the sedative wore off, he woke up and didn't sleep again. He thought a lot and recalled a lot. In the end, he came to the conclusion that she had been hiding her true self in school. There were so many things he wanted to ask, but every time, he couldn't get them out. After pursing his lips for a while, Gao Yang said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I don't have anything to do. I just came over to thank you. Last night, if it wasn't for you, I don't even know if I would have made it out alive." After a slight pause, she looked at her distant face and sped up her speech. "Thank you, Yi Qian. I was too reckless in the past and liked to take things out of context. I misunderstood you again and again. Fortunately, you're a great person who doesn't mind my mistakes and didn't hold it against me." He laughed self-deprecatingly, revealing the innocence that a boy should have. "Now I know how ridiculous I was in school. I jumped around in front of you like a clown and didn't even realize it. If you wanted to talk about this, then there was no need." Yi Qian smiled faintly and interrupted, "It's not a big deal. I'm not that magnanimous, but I won't fight over the usual disputes and misunderstandings to the point where it's a matter of life and death. As for Ying, I'll say the same thing again. Don't mention her in front of me in the future. I really can't like her." When she mentioned Ying, her tone was cold. It was obvious that their relationship was quite bad. The only difference was that she never gossiped about Ying. Just as her father had said, sometimes it wasn't just about looking at a person, but also about thinking with one's heart. As for Yi Qian, if she didn't like someone, she would say that she didn't like them. She had never heard her talk about others behind their backs. She finally understood that such a person was rare and valuable. Smiling, his inexperienced handsome face had a trace of soaring spirit. His unperturbed eyes lost a trace of coldness and gained a bit of color. Okay, I won't mention it again. You haven't had breakfast yet, right? Let's go. Putting aside her previous prejudice, Gao Yang was indeed a friend worth befriending. Oh. This would explain why Gao Yang did not get together with Yi Ying. She probably left without hesitation after seeing Yi Ying's true face. When they reached the cafeteria, they bumped into another Vietnamese student, as well as the only son of the high official who was kidnapped by Red Scorpion last night. When he saw Yi Qian, his eyes clearly shrank. He pursed his lips and silently took a step back. This step back made the other two Vietnamese students who had appeared in the Red Scorpion room together involuntarily take a step back, allowing Yi Qian and Gao Yang to pass. When they passed by, Yi Qian suddenly stopped. Her gaze fell on the boy who was hiding at the back, trying to minimize his presence. He was the boy who caused her and Gao Yang to be kidnapped. Chapter 206. Her pause immediately made the three boys nervous. They didn't even dare to raise their heads, much less pass Yi Qian and leave. In reality, Yi Qian had only stopped for a moment and left without even saying a word. However, it was precisely because of this that the three of them didn't even dare to breathe loudly. She seemed to be looking at the boy at the back, but in reality, she was sizing up the only son of a high official from the corner of her eye. The only son of a high official. He kept appearing in Red Scorpion's room. In her previous life, she had also seen on the news that high officials were involved in these drug-producing countries. That pair of hands that seemed to be protecting one side was actually dirtier and darker. Xia Jinyuan and the others should know a little about it. However, this was a matter of the Vietnamese and had nothing to do with outsiders. There were 3 days of exams in a row, and the competition in the final exam today was even more intense. Everyone competed to answer the questions, and the entire process was broadcasted live by Australian television. This allowed the Australians who were paying attention to the mathematical Olympiad to see the elegance of the students from each country. The Vietnamese students were not doing well today. Sometimes, even if they managed to grab the questions, they would lose due to a small mistake and end up at the bottom. The competition was the fiercest in China, America, England, and Korea. The students from these 4 countries were all fighting as if they were wearing armor. They were all calm and collected. If there was even the slightest mistake in the middle, the other students would immediately snatch the points back. When it came to mental arithmetic, the gap between them was immediately widened. The first to lose was England, then Korea. In the end, only the Chinese and American students were competing on the stage. The situation suddenly reached an unprecedented level of tension. The atmosphere in the audience was like the air had frozen. Even the announcer who was reporting the live broadcast had a serious expression on her face. Unfortunately, although the Australian contestants tried their best, they were eliminated in the end. However, we are all proud of them because, to be honest, I believe that at least 90% of the people in the country can't do those questions. Up until now, our broadcast room has only received 4 correct answers, and they were all answers provided by adults. The announcer's expression was serious, but her hosting style was humorous. Even if it was her own country's students being eliminated, she still felt that it was a great thing. Below the stage, the teacher's expressions were solemn. Watching the final confrontation between the Chinese and American students, they all held their breaths, waiting to see what the final outcome would be. Theory and mental calculation were carried out simultaneously. Even if the adults watching the live broadcast were confused, they could still feel how fierce the competition in the examination room was. The Chinese and American students did not give in at all. The students' mental calculations and answers were like calculators. Their verbal and logical abilities were extraordinary. The calmness and confidence they displayed when they defeated their opponents pushed the entire competition to the climax. Director Lee sat on the stage with his arms crossed. His expression looked very calm, but in fact, his hands were clenched tightly under his armpits. His palms were already sweaty. Our country's Olympiad started relatively late. We only joined this competition in 1985. Team competition has always been our country's strength. This time, we came with the determination to win the team gold medal. Therefore, when the rest of the opponents were defeated and only one opponent was left, Director Lee did not even dare to blink. He stared at the stage, afraid that he would miss the slightest bit. 5 hours later, when the time was up, the Americans shrugged their shoulders regretfully. The Chinese team had won 3 gold medals, while the Americans only had 2. Chapter 207. In this mathematical Olympiad, the Chinese team once again stood out. The individual gold medal and team total score were among the best. When the results were announced, Director Lee stood up with a whoosh and strode to the examination room to give all the contestants who had persisted for 5 hours a warm hug. The audience also applauded continuously. This was for all the students. Regardless of success or failure, the spirit of the students' hard work was worthy of praise. Father Gao, who had never attended his son's parent-teacher conference, and had never even been to his son's school, had tears in his eyes. As a middle-aged man, there was a trace of gentleness in his love for family compared to when he was young. He really didn't know that his son was so outstanding that he was so proud of him. A fierce competition ended with the contestants shaking hands with each other and a gentle smile on their faces. The mathematical Olympiad ended. Yi Qian received the gold medal that she had obtained in 2 lifetimes. She, who had always been calm and composed, was also slightly red-eyed. In her previous life, she had gone through hardships but still could not escape from Yi Ying's persecution. In this life, she finally did not need to look at Sun Dongqing and Yi Ying's faces and live carefully. She could stand upright and no longer suffer from that cowardice. The continuous applause was like flowers that appeared on the roadside when you walked through a thorny road. You could stop to feel the joy, but never forget that a wonderful life could not be stopped because of this. Yi Qian, Yang Yi, the 2 girls, stand in front. The boys stand on the left and right. Take a group photo together. Below the stage, Director Lee, who had a face full of pride, and the staff sent by the embassy took the first group photo of all the students in Australia. When the 12 contestants began to visit the scenery of the University of Sydney, this photo had already been sent back to China by the embassy staff. Yi Qian and the others had not yet returned from Australia. In China, the news that the Chinese team won the most gold medals in the mathematical Olympiad team and the individual gold medals swept across the country like a spring breeze. Even the People's Daily, which had the largest circulation, reported it and accompanied the contestants' performance on the stage. Yi Zhifan was the deputy mayor, and the People's Daily was the paper he had to read every time. When he saw the photo that occupied the most important section of the People's Daily, his gaze suddenly froze. Then he looked at the name attached. His originally relaxed brows suddenly furrowed, and his expression had changed greatly. He had just arrived at work. He picked up his briefcase from his desk, clenched the newspaper in his hand, and strode out of the office. A government worker saw that he seemed to have left in a hurry and asked kindly, "Deputy Mayor Yi, there are still 10 minutes before the meeting. What are you? Postpone the meeting for an hour. I have something urgent to attend to." How could he be in the mood for a meeting? Yi Zhifan didn't even look back. He left the office building with a gloomy face and sped home on his motorcycle. After breakfast, Sun Dongqing took Yi Ying to the streets to buy groceries. When they came back, they happened to meet the villagers of Shuka village. At this time, they were already proudly talking about Yi Ying's results in the midterm exam. It's not that I want to praise my Ying Ying, but this child is very sensible. Old Yi and I have never had to worry about her studies. As a matter of fact, he was one of the top few students in the entire cohort during the final exam. Everyone says that all things are inferior, and only education is good. My Ying Ying is not a boy, but in what way is she inferior to a boy? During this period of time, Sun Dongqing was a little arrogant again. It was said that Yi Zhifan was very likely to become the mayor, and her daughter was very capable. Wherever she went, she held her chin high. Yi Zhifan, who was riding his motorcycle all the way, happened to see his wife chatting with the villagers. His gloomy face was almost squeezed out of water. Chapter 208. The women from the same village would more or less interact with Sun Dongqing. After all, she was the wife of an official. Sometimes, if they wanted to do something, it was difficult to find Yi Zhifan, but it was definitely not a problem to find Sun Dongqing. Sun Dongqing was greedy and liked to listen to flattery. Sun Dongqing was both. My old Yi always says that even though my Ying Ying is not a man, she will definitely not be bad in the future. Next year, she will definitely be able to get into the provincial experimental high school in the middle school exams. She will definitely be able to get into Hua University and Shi University. She became more and more enthusiastic as she spoke, her saliva flying everywhere. Even though she was very plump, she really did not match Yi Zhifan in terms of temperament. When the women from the same village heard this, they clicked their tongues and exclaimed, "Isn't that so? Who doesn't know that your Yi family is full of talents? And this talent is from your family. Ying Ying is born with good looks and good grades. When she becomes a university student, she will be a golden phoenix flying out of our poor village." Yi Ying liked to hear these words. When she heard this, she pursed her lips and smiled sweetly. "Auntie Tao, I know that little brother Little Dong also got into town high school. In the future, little brother Little Dong can look for me in class if he needs anything. If he doesn't know where my classroom is, just ask around and a classmate will bring him here." When Auntie Tao met her, she first mentioned that little brother Dong got into town high school and that he would have to worry about something in the future. Yi Ying immediately knew why she was here. Since Yi Qian, that damned girl, made her life in school even more difficult, then she had to think of a way to make everyone in the same village stand by her side. Let's see if she has the face to return to the village in the future. Rumors and slanders killed people. Since she had failed to seduce teacher, she would have to take her time. Yi Ying's smile became even sweeter as a gloomy look flashed across her eyes. She didn't believe that she couldn't win against an orphan. If 1 year wasn't enough, then 2 years. If 2 years wasn't enough, then 3 years. As long as that damned girl returned to the village, she would have a chance. When Auntie Tao heard this, she immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Of course not. I say, Dongqing, your Ying Ying is really sensible. No wonder everyone in the village said that the one who had become a demon in the Yi family was actually Yi Ying. Looking at it now, wasn't it true? Yi Zhifan had been listening for a while. If it weren't for his status, he would have walked over and taught the mother and daughter who didn't know anything a lesson. His hands tightened on the handle of the motorcycle. Just as he was about to leave, he heard the sound of a car horn behind him. A black Santana stopped next to him. Someone greeted him with a smile, "Deputy Mayor Yi, Deputy Mayor Yi." A Santana stopped, and the person sitting in the back seat came over with a smile. "Long time no see, Deputy Mayor Yi. Isn't this Secretary Wu? Are you going to school?" When Yi Zhifan saw who it was, the gloominess on his face disappeared. He walked over with a smile and held Secretary Wu's hand. He said politely, "It's so hot today. Do you have something urgent?" Secretary Wu was the leader of the city's education bureau. Auntie Tao heard it too. When she looked over, she clicked her tongue and said, "Old Yi is really a busy man. That person looks like an official. TSK, TSK, TSK. Dongqing, you're really lucky. Wasn't he a blessed person?" Sun Dongqing smiled arrogantly, "I have to go take a look. You're busy. If you don't return to the village at noon, come to my house for lunch." After that, she pulled Ying over. Chapter 209. Aunt Tao, who had wanted to get closer to her, did not dare to make her stay. Seeing the mother and daughter walk over, she stopped for a while and left. "I just found out that you're Yi Qian's uncle." This is really. When Sun Dongqing heard Yi Qian's name, she was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She immediately exploded, "Yi Qian. Old Yi, what trouble did that wretched girl get into again? Let me tell you, whether she lives or dies has nothing to do with my family. Wretched girl, ungrateful wretch. If it weren't for my family raising her, she would have been a beggar begging for rice." He spoke quickly and hurriedly, without any pause or buffer. He finished speaking with a crackling sound like firecrackers, but he didn't notice that Yi Ying was already sweating from anxiety. "Mom, what are you saying?" Yi Ying was afraid that she would say something unpleasant, so she quickly pulled her back and whispered, "Mom, Dad's expression has changed, and you're still talking. Why don't you see who the important guest is? You can't say anything nice the moment you open your mouth." Yi Ying was also an expert at reading people's expressions, even though she also liked to let others know more about Yi Qian's scandals. But now, who was the guest? What was he doing here? Why was he looking for Yi Qian? She had no idea. Sun Dongqing was still a little unhappy. What, how long has it been since that wretched girl showed up? When I asked you, you said you didn't know. When I asked your dad, he wouldn't tell me. Who knows if she got into trouble outside? This wretched girl, she just doesn't. Mom, can you stop talking? Yi Ying's little face was now pale because Yi Jifan's gaze just now was so sharp that it made her shiver involuntarily. Secretary Wu was talking happily. With Sun Dongqing's reprimand, he could tell that something was wrong. He did not show it on his face, but he smiled and asked, Sai, I've embarrassed myself in front of you. This is my wife. She doesn't know anything. All she knows is to take care of her 3 meals a day. The children like to spread rumors about the slightest mistake. It was impossible for him to teach Sun Dongqing a lesson in front of outsiders. People who worked in the officialdom were good at smoothing things over. They didn't need to explain anything, but they could explain everything clearly. Secretary Wu's expression softened a little. He had wanted to say a few more words, but now he was not in the mood. It seemed that he should wait for Yi Qian to come back. He smiled and said, "So it's Madam Yi. That little classmate must be Deputy Mayor Ye's daughter." "That's right. Come, Ying, say hello to Secretary Wu." How could Yi Jifan not see the change in the situation? The other party was clearly here for Yi Qian, but he could not bring himself to mention it. He had to smooth things over first. In terms of social interaction, Yi Ying had always been polite and appropriate. With Sun Dongqing's previous offense, Yi Ying's actions and words were very dignified. "Hello, Uncle Wu. If my mother offended you just now, please don't take it to heart. She was just worried about my sister, so she spoke without thinking. Please don't take it to heart." Yi Jifan, who was suppressing the anger in his heart, saw this and calmed down quite a bit. His daughter was still sensible, but she was still a little narrow-minded. He would teach her slowly in the future. It's normal for a family to be worried. Then I won't disturb you. Deputy Mayor Yi, let's chat again next time. Secretary Woot saw some clues, but for Yi Jifan's sake, he naturally wouldn't embarrass his wife. He said a few words of courtesy, which was considered as giving face to her. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.